I think the claim that I'm making is a bunch of epistemic vices, like bad methodologies for thinking about things, that are being encouraged in the type of way that Jordan Peterson is approaching these topics, and Paul van der Clay and Peugeot and Viveki, and that those vices underpin the same conspiratorial thinking that leads people into like QAnon conspiracism, into like anti-vax conspiracism.
Welcome to another episode. We've got Nathan from the Digital Gnosis YouTube channel, and we have crossed paths because through Pine Creek.
So Doug was the person who deconverted me, and I think not exclusively, but my conversation with him was a major part of sort of like breaking the kind of worldview that I had. And I think because I was in so deep on the philosophy and theology and stuff, like, I knew all of the kind of techniques that apologists sell. I was reading all the books and all that sort of stuff. The fact that it worked on me was sort of like a major selling point of that, like, because you have a lot of conversations with people who are quite firmly entrenched in the types of beliefs that I had, and it doesn't always lead to success. So I think the fact that in my case it did lead to success was kind of something that was interesting for Doug to explore and for his audience to explore, like, revisiting things with me and me talking about like my kind of journey and process and stuff. And then I started doing things on my YouTube channel around criticizing particularly fundamentalist religions, but mostly like criticizing apologetics as well, attempts to essentially smooth over plot holes in theological stories and things. And I think that then attracted some people from Doug's audience, and there was some kind of like crossover, I suppose, in our channel goals. And just at that time in my life, it was kind of fun to hang out and like laugh at some of the kind of traumatizing things, but also kind of like silliness of the whole like apologetics thing, and the way that some of these people behave and build their whole lives around, like 3 pretty bad arguments or something.
I went back to get ready for this and watched your How I Became a Christian video, because you've left that up, which I love, by the way, because you have that up, and then I'll put some links if people are interested, because I'm not going to like replay it, but you have that, and then you have you reviewing like 2 weeks after you first talked to Doug, that, and then you also have, I don't know how much later it was, your second talk with Doug.
I've gone back and watched it a few times. Yeah, I think maybe I've got like 3 videos that are like reflecting at different points since, or something like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, okay, what I want to do is I kind of wanted to ask you. So I watched that video, and then I just wanted to kind of summarize the way you described yourself, and you can like correct me if I mess up the summary, but like you kind of started by saying you didn't feel like you were as good of a student as you could have been. You described feeling abandoned because of your adoption. Then you said you met your birth mom, and that didn't really go well, and then you ended up in the hospital for a suicide attempt. You had broken relationships. You didn't know how who you were or what was going on. And you said you were destroyed by porn and you were driven by anger. And so this is like your summary of your life until you met Christianity, right? And so so that's that video. And so it's just bizarre watching that and then seeing where you're at now. When you joined Christianity, how did that come about? Did you have a friend that was Christian? Like,
I think it was pretty much exclusively, well, not exclusively. Obviously there are a lot of influences being raised in the UK that are like, it's kind of like if you're going to become religious, it's the default cultural religion. It's kind of built into the political system, the legal system, and built into the school system to some degree. It's not
the
like
church that you
massively.
joined? Or
The Church of England, not that, well, the church that I joined was part of the Church of England, and the Church of England is quite a complicated organization. You know, like there are a lot of things the Church of England is and does that I'm very supportive of still. Um, but there are also, within the Church of England, there's kind of like different sub denominations almost. So the church I joined was like what's called like very low church, kind of evangelical. And in their attempts to understand and define themselves, a lot of their concerns are basically exported from US evangelicalism, because that's the kind of content that they consume in terms of the books that they're reading, the problems that Christianity has to face in the world. They'll be listening to the sermons of, you know, those sorts of like evangelical preachers in the US. And so I think for a lot of the rest of the Church of England, you know, it's almost like a kind of cultural social thing where there's kind of like biscuits, and you can do some stuff to for like in your community, and maybe like celebrate harvest, or like it's just stuff like that, right? Whereas the more low church fundamentalists really put like an emphasis on right doctrine, right theology, generally Calvinist type theology. It's more sectarian. It's more like us versus them. We're in the world, not of the world. All your kids are on Instagram and TikTok having their minds turned to mush by sex, and we're kind of pure in our in group, and this is the pattern for you know, like a lot of these sorts of tropes come out in
right.
that.
Okay, so help me out with some terms. So sectarian, does that just mean that you're there's a certain sect that's correct and you were in the correct one? Is that what you mean by
Yeah, by sectarian, I just mean like very us versus them kind of
oh,
attitude, like polemical to those who aren't on the in group type thing. Yeah.
okay. The church that you participated in, how did you choose that one
Oh
over
yeah, sorry,
another?
you did
Like,
ask. So the first thing that I was going to answer to your previous question was, I think the decision for me to go to church was actually driven by watching Jordan Peterson's biblical psychological interpretation of the biblical series lectures. I'd watched his maps of meaning lectures and his personality and psychology lectures from multiple years actually before that, um, and his appearances on various podcasts and things. Um, and then he was like doing the psychological interpretation of the biblical series lectures at that time, and there was one of them, maybe the second or third, where in the Q&A session at the end, um, someone said something like about being having a question at a Bible study. So I think that I that sort of like just triggered a thought in me. I was like, oh, people do like Bible studies, right? I'm kind of enjoying this. I'm like really enjoying listening to Jordan Peterson all the time. So maybe like I'll find more people like this at a Bible study. So I searched like the local churches that are around where I live, and that was the one I found that seemed to have like a publicly marketed and available Bible study that would take place on a Friday morning at 6 a.m. And so I just decided to start going. So that was basically how I made my decision. I didn't know much about Christian theology and the differences and between different denominations and things before that.
so you found a local church that was close nearby. What kind of options did you have? And did you
So
look at a
there's,
bunch and
oh,
go, I
sorry.
like this one because?
Yeah, I mean, I looked at there's like another church that's kind of, you know, more community, sort of one of those like cultural churches, maybe more progressive in its theology. I mean, I not that I would have really understood that at the time, to be completely honest, but they just didn't market that. I don't know if they do Bible studies, maybe they do, but at least it's not, you can't find that out easily site, right?
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, there's another church around um just up the road, actually, in Handforth Parish. For people like, I don't know if you know the famous video Handforth Parish Council.
Mm-mm.
You know, the "You have no authority here, Jackie Weaver" during COVID, where they were all bickering. It went viral, but that's actually the church for that parish was one of the options as well.
Hmm.
And yeah, again, I couldn't find a Bible study through their website either very easily. Um, and I knew like I had some school friends who, when they were younger, had like gone to this other church as well. So maybe that slightly influenced. I was like, oh, I'll go and check out like the type of Christianity that they were in. Um, in terms of other I didn't really consider Catholicism, but my to be fair to me, like my nearest Catholic church is quite far away as well. There is a Catholic church here, um, but it's like one of those where like they're only there for the mass every so often, and it's like shared with like another church that's a bit further away. So that's where they do most of their things. But presumably they do like RCIA courses and stuff. But I didn't know anything about RCIA or whatever at the time. Don't think that there's not an Eastern Orthodox church for quite a while, though that was something I had considered because of Peterson mentioning his icon carver friend who was Eastern Orthodox. So I'd like Googled about that, but then I was like, that's a bit far and inconvenient to get to. Though I did end up, after I'd deconverted, going to that Eastern Orthodox church a bit to kind of explore Eastern Orthodoxy. But and then yeah, I can't think of other denominations really. It just
So there's probably not. There's just not a lot of like of the people you grew up around and stuff. Did you know a lot of people that were practicing Christians, or is it
so
not?
not really.
Or if they
Yeah.
were, they you didn't know about it?
So there were definitely like two friends I can think of that were from Christian families. Um, I think both of them actually went to that church that I ended up going to, interestingly. And I think both of their parents stopped going at some point in their life. And I don't know their reasons why, because like I never really talked to them or anything. I think the one of the main reasons for the kids continuing to go was associated to scouts being related to the church. So scouts is like Boy Scouts. I don't know like what the Canadian or American equivalent is, to be honest, but like
There's like a Boy Scouts
I think
of
you've got
America. In fact,
yeah,
Mormon Church is like was very very married to that
right.
organization, and they probably kept it alive for a long time, but they're no longer associated with each other.
Okay. So that's like similarly with Scouts and the Church of England, like Bear Grylls, who's the head of like Scouts in the UK, is a Christian as well. And yeah, so I think they probably kind of hung around it because they were a part of that. And then I don't know if that how much that influenced me, to be honest. Like maybe it did a little bit, but I don't know that it was like a major thing in my decision making. And I think another possibility is that I was sort of being driven slightly down the kind of like culture war right-leaning like YouTube algorithm pipeline at the time as well. So a
Yes,
lot of the
I'm part
videos
of
I
that
was
right now.
watching
Thank you.
a lot of the videos I was watching were like wrecked feminist videos, like Jesse Lee Peterson when he'd interview people and say like he'd have someone on who was like a rapper or something, and that it'd be all kind of sex-based lyrics in their rap songs or something, and they wouldn't be very well articulated. And then he'd just be like, "Do you love your mother? Can you say that you love your father? Can you say I forgive you, father?" And you're like, "You need God," and stuff. And I don't know what was going on. Well, I sort of know what was going on at the time, right? I felt like I didn't fit in with all the fun and stuff that people around my age were having. They're going out partying, going off to university, having like nice lives, enjoying their youth, and I kind of wasn't. And I couldn't make sense of it. I was in a lot of pain. And, I think when I was looking at conversations like that, I was sort of thinking, well, yeah, clearly, like the people that are a part of that, like contemporary culture of the youth have got it wrong, and actually, like the people who are saying like turn to God and like have these conservative values, and the real thing to aim for in life is to have your pregnant barefoot wife in the middle of a farm or whatever, is they're the people who've got it right. I mean, not quite exactly that, but those are the kind of stereotypes that were probably like running around in my head at the time.
Hmm. So, how long did you like go to your Bible study before you like really? Because you became part of the parish or whatever, right? Like, am I saying that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know how long. So I remember the very first time I turned up, um, and I can't remember exactly what they were talking about, but we ended up talking about Genesis for a bit. And I remember bringing up all the stuff that Peterson said. I mean, I now sort of, now having studied a bit at least of like biblical studies wouldn't necessarily go with a lot of what Peterson has to say about the Bible. He sort of gets it right every so often, but there's a lot of heterodox interpretation or kind of, but anyway, some of the things he said about like ancient Near Eastern stories influencing things that are happening in Genesis, for example, are, that statement on its own, let's say, is true, that the ancient Near Eastern stories have influenced the stuff that's in Genesis. And I was bringing that up and talking about it, sort of mimicking the things that Peterson said. And I think for some of these evangelicals, that was quite interesting because they kind of read the Bible not like that at all. They read the Bible, almost as if they're kind of talking to, like, God's just talking to them directly through the English text, kind of divorced from history quite a lot, divorced from literary styles of different cultures that might be kind of alien, like that. There's not a lot of thinking about, there might be legwork to kind of translate a different thought world into our thought world. The idea in that community around like hermeneutic principles seems to be that there's like a truth that's embedded in the text. So as we read it with the guidance of the Holy Spirit, we'll like grasp that.
You're gonna have to remind me hermeneutics. What you mean by that?
Hermeneutic, just like principles of interpretation for like principles of like textual interpretation,
Okay.
basically. And one of the principles for that group was that because the Holy Spirit's helping us as believers to interpret this text, we can just kind of access that objective meaning of the text without really having to do, without kind of having to accept our limitations in terms of understanding that like culture that might be quite alien to us, or without perhaps having to understand the ways that the English has been translated from different languages or textual variations, that like all that stuff. They're aware
Kamil
of it to
type
some
stuff.
degree. Yeah, Kamil type stuff. They're aware that that stuff exists, right? But it's all kind of brushed under the carpet because it's like, well, look, the Holy Spirit's gonna help. I don't need that, man. Like I got Jesus.
Do you think there's any use in like using texts like that in, I'm trying to think, in like a non-objective way though? Like, do you think that's a useful practice at all?
Depends what your goals are, to me.
Your goals, your goals being to help you see yourself in a way that might be better, I guess. Like, are there wisdom
Yeah.
nuggets in there? Like, do you think, like, obviously I understand that people will interpret something they want to be objectively true about the world through the text, which to me is absurd. But I would like to bet that if I was disciplined enough to like read the Bible or ancient texts of some sort on a daily basis as like a meditative practice, it would probably be beneficial to me. But I am actually not disciplined enough to do that. I never have been. But anyway, I'm just curious about your thoughts on that.
I think there can be value in it. For me, it's very careful. For me, it's very difficult to get it right because I need to be with a community of people who are kind of quite cautious and reflective and aware of the tendency to just project your own prejudices and biases into the text and then give them the kind of gravitas of, yeah, well, God agrees with me for like all of your biases and prejudices.
Absolutely, because that's actually why my worldview of Mormonism fell apart, is because I realized that the spiritual witness that I was depending on being true was obviously could possibly be me just wanting it to be true, right? So like, and I guess that's why I differentiate. Like the way that I've kind of see that now is I feel like your intuitions are helpful in helping you to make decisions in your life, but they're not really good at telling you about objective truth, obviously. Like that's kind of where I'm going with that. Like I wouldn't try to use my intuitions to try to make some kind of objective claim about reality, but as far as my day-to-day life, could it help me decide on what to value more than another, right?
Yeah, I mean, maybe like I can't tell you what your psychology is like, right? But for me at least, the word intuition is quite a complicated one because it's not clear to me that it is like a noun that refers to some one type of psychological experience called intuition. It's like a word that I apply in a lot of very different contexts. And some of those contexts would be like, maybe when I was reading the Bible as a Christian, like I would say, yeah, I had like an intuition that this is the correct interpretation. But maybe that same feeling of this is right or something, it's sort of like the same feeling I might have had when I was doing A level physics and I finished, doing like some kind of like equation about the way that some body in space will orbit and the different forces acting on it or something in a question, right? Where that in the one case, one of those is scientific, in the other case, one of those is theological. But the way that intuition is sort of being used in both cases could be the same for me. Like it just kind of there's a certain point where maybe I've used a type of method and something just rings true with me and I think it's right. Now maybe the difference is that in the case of the physics, maybe you make some further observations and like the predictions or whatever might turn out to be false. And so then you've got that correcting mechanism of, oh shit, I did get something wrong then, even though it felt right. And maybe in the theology, it's not so clear what kind of predictions fall out because it's more like it tends to be more like moral claims about how you should behave or whatever. But it's not like from those should claims you really get any like predictions about what will happen, and then you can make an observation and be like, oh yeah, so that actually didn't happen when I thought it would. Maybe the closest you get to that would be predictions around like the return of Jesus or something, or like miracle events happening. But
That's an
yeah,
objective reality claim, though. That's not the kind of thing I'm talking about when you're reading the Bible. I'd be talking more about you go and you're reading the Bible and you read the verse about um, worry about the mote in your eye before the beam in your own eye before the
right.
mote
I
in
see.
your
Yeah,
neighbor's eye, and then you go, oh my God, like I've been an asshole to so and so, and I have, like, you know what I mean, like that kind of self
but
reflection.
but let me try and sort of like draw the um sort of like similarity between what I'm saying in physics, right? So then suppose someone's telling you about like Newtonian gravity, and you find out that like the forces that are acting between two bodies, the force that's acting between them, then it gets divided by the distance between them squared, right? And then you realize that that squaring is because the further that they get apart, the force gets weaker by a factor that's getting squared, and it just kind of like, oh yeah, that just kind of like makes sense. I can kind of see it spatially. It's not clear what you're seeing or feeling, but isn't that to me that's the same kind of sense of it just seems true to me or something like that,
Hmm.
right? That I would get doing theology. I don't know if
I guess I wouldn't. I'm
it's the
trying to
same
think
for
if
you or
I would
different.
call that intuition. That to me feels like an aha moment. I just
Hmm.
phrase it a little differently, I guess. Like where something clicks for you and you're like, oh, that makes sense.
Hmm.
I don't know that I would call that intuition.
Hmm. But this is why I say intuition is a very sticky sort of word, right? Because it's not clear to me. It's not like a rigorously defined mathematical term or something, where it's like clear cut.
Whatever,
Here's where you're using it
whatever
right.
that
Here's where.
self-reflective kind of whatever that thing is, because it's like hard to know how our and obviously it can be detrimental, which is I think why a community, like you were saying, a trusted community is good because you can beat yourself up for no reason and like be heading nowhere too. Like you can, for example, you could read a scripture or something and then it not be helpful the way that you are interpreting it for yourself even,
Hmm.
right? Like I can see that too. But anyways, that was just a thought I had. Um I guess another question I had, like have you ever ran into Latter-day Saints like in real life in the
Yeah,
flesh? Have you
yeah, I
ever
have
had any
in
friends or like what's your
not well,
closest relationship?
James Fodor, who's an ex-Mormon, would be probably my closest relationship who of someone who's an LDS or
I'm not sure
ex-LDS.
who that is.
But
Is that something that you have on your channel?
yeah, James, who I do the Bad Apologetics series with,
Oh, he
he's
has his own
probably
channel?
in. Called James Fodor. In my opinion, he's one of the most intelligent people I know. Definitely the most well read across the sciences and philosophy. And so his sort of clarity of thought when it comes, like, I think what he really loves is accurately and clearly explaining facts about things, whether it be like the sciences or political claims, philosophical claims. And because of his kind of like broad set of interests and how well read he is, he does a really great job at kind of like approaching philosophers' claims about science or scientists' claims about philosophy and kind of like bridging some of those gaps that people might have between. So he's got a podcast called The Science of Everything for people who are interested.
I'll have to link it. I'm gonna make a note.
Yeah, it's a really good science podcast. Actually, I've learned a lot from it. For example, I always now remember cations are positive because of positive. But but yeah, he was a Mormon and left. In terms of
Where's he
other
from?
people who I've met, Australia. In
So,
terms of other
in your
people
real life, like,
physically,
mhm.
well, I've met missionaries around like Manchester. I've not actually met any missionaries when I've been in Glasgow or London. I currently live in London actually, but when I've been in Manchester, there's like a big missionary building that they'd built near the university, and a few times I stopped and talked to the people who were there and actually had like street epistemology type conversations with them about the types of things that they believed, and also just got to know them and like why that, like their kind of like life story a little bit about what brought them, because but by and large they tended to be like Americans who were on mission for some period of time in the UK. So.
I'm curious, like, what your perspective. This is just out of my own curiosity. Like, what was your perspective? What's been your perspective of Latter-day Saints over time? Like, when did you first become aware? What did you think about them? Like, do you feel like, how much do you know about now? Like, anyway.
I think to some degree, I was always like aware of them and Jehovah's Witnesses as like weird belief systems or something. When I say always, like from however long I remember being like reflective about religions existing and stuff like that. So maybe not when I was like 4, right?
That was
But
your first impression of it.
yeah, but I think yeah, my impression is I think I find it kind of weird because, like, I remember, like the symbol of the person with the horn, for example. Like, I remember seeing that on, like buildings. I just find it's just something like weird about it. It kind of like
Symbol
gives me
of
an
a person with a horn.
yeah, like a person with a long horn like that on the
Oh,
LDS.
Angel Moroni.
Yeah, I don't know, but even just that imagery to me is just it gives me like it's always given me like an icky feeling. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what that is. In terms of the stuff I understand about Mormon theology, I mean, like, I understand that it's much more compatible with like naturalism and physicalism than some, but you believe in like well, some people
What makes you
say,
say that? I'm just curious.
because some of the Mormons that I know are like full-blown physicalists and naturalists, and the way that they talk
Oh,
about
active Latter-day Saints?
yeah, like Tariq Delacour, I'm thinking of, who's a PhD in philosophy at Texas University, and he tends to like have basically the same view as
Are
me
they like
about.
progressive Mormons?
I'm not sure in terms of the politics, to be honest.
How are you aware of this person? I'm just curious. I don't know who this is.
Well, I'm aware of them because their views on like philosophy of mind and stuff like that are so close to my own in terms of like the physicalist views, right? And the reasons for which he'll reject a lot of like supernatural claims or views that include like souls or spooks or ghosts, whatever, are going to be like the same reasons I'd provide. So I always find it super interesting that this
Well, I
person's
find
like a
that
Mormon.
interesting. How does that person grapple with the fact that Joseph Smith claims to have physical gold plates that are historical documents?
Well, I'm
Does he
not sure
talk
about
about
that.
that? Oh,
I am probably somewhere. I mean, because it's not something I'm that interested in. I've not really
I'm
looked
just
into
curious
the
because
history around it that
you're
much.
saying
Yeah,
he's not supernatural in his thinking, but that's part of the reason where I
yeah,
felt like I couldn't participate anymore is because I agreeing
Well,
with
maybe
that
he'll
stuff.
have
That's
maybe
interesting.
he'll have some supernatural thing then. But at least in, like in the vast majority of the types of things I'll talk about, like maybe out of body experiences, near death experiences, like types of things that people ordinarily are claiming to be evidence of the supernatural. At least he agrees with me on those. Maybe there are some that he doesn't agree with me on though, like
There's
the
a
plates.
special pleading maybe somewhere, or it's
Yeah.
possible that he really does have it. What I've found since just kind of observing different people and having open conversations with people is that there's like no two Latter-day Saints that believe the same thing. So, I mean, there are probably people that are really naturalistic in their theology too. So that's totally possible.
But yeah, I find it a kind of weird one. But firstly, because of, I mean, it's very kind of specific to the US, a lot of the stuff that happened historically. And then I mean, a lot of the stuff I know about it is also influenced by that cult documentary I watched recently on the fundamentalist Latter-day Saints called Keep Sweet on Netflix. So that I think that they were part of like the polygamists split off. I understand that there's like a divide over polygamy and monogamy within Mormonism. And I understand like a lot of there's a lot of wealth because of the rules around like tithing and stuff, and like they've even got their own university. They quite proactively try to ensure that people receive a decent education so they can earn well and give back to the organization as well, I think, through the university. I think that's one of like the overarching goals. But
No, I wouldn't say the university is central. There's a lot of people that go to that university, but you'll have, I mean, Utah's filled with Latter-day Saints, and there's other universities that, like, I didn't go to BYU.
and then like it just in terms of like the claims of the religion, I understand that it's like, well, everything was corrupted before, there's a new final revelation now, which is sort of the same stuff that a lot of religious movements have kind of gone with.
Mhm.
And then there's supposed like proofs and things in the text, like chiasms and things like that exist, that how else do you explain it with the supernatural? Obviously, Joseph Smith's the guy who's supposed to have had the angel appear to him and tell him a bunch of this stuff. And like, did the gold plates have commandments written down on them or something like that?
That's
And
where
there's
the Book of
supposed to
Mormon came
be,
from.
and then isn't there supposed to be like a tribe of Israelites from the Old Testament that came across to? Is that where the gold plates came from? Actually,
Yeah.
from that tribe? Yeah, yeah. Um, so I know a bit about like that stuff, a bit about
That's
the
actually quite a bit.
okay,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's not really something like I find it interesting more sociologically, I think, but like the actual theology and stuff, I'm not like super into. I've never got like gone down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. As far as any other practices, like what do you know? Like food restrictions, stuff like that.
Yeah, I
Temples.
mean, I hear
How much about that?
stuff about underpants. I don't know. I don't exactly know the stuff about underpants. What's actually true there? I know that like sex and stuff can be quite weird.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't know that it would be any more weird than
yeah,
any
right.
other Christian. Like they just say no sex before
Sure, sure.
marriage. Mhm.
Yeah, that sort of
Oh,
stuff.
and no
What
masturbating too. And they
yeah, and
ask
I
you
suppose
questions in interviews about it.
yeah, that's what I mean by sex being weird is that like within the kind of like culture of Mormonism, I understand that there's a lot of like that kind of guilt and shame that's drilled into people around sex, but also this kind of idea that what you should be doing is kind of like procreating with it within like a family, right? Like that's kind of the goal of relationships as well. Like sex isn't so much for
Oh, no, I wouldn't
enjoyment
say.
or
Not
yeah.
modern. Maybe at some point it was
Okay.
like that, but not modern. No. You would have like sex therapists that could be good Latter-day
Oh,
Saints and stuff
okay.
like that. So,
Interesting.
um yeah, food restrictions. Like what is your
Is a
what is
shellfish? Is shellfish one of them?
no.
No. Um. Yeah, I honestly don't know. Oh, coffee,
Yep.
alcohol as
Yes.
well. Um. I don't know what else though. Yeah, you
Tea.
have to help me. Oh, okay, right. Any
Tea and
caffeine
coffee.
then?
Not caffeine.
Oh, okay. Makes sense. Of
It's
course.
it's a scripture that is hot drinks, and the modern prophets have decided it means tea and coffee. So,
And hot chocolate?
no, hot chocolate. I know that's a hot drink. That's not how the scriptures interpreted.
Okay.
See, they have a living prophet. That's another thing. I don't know if you're aware of
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that was what in the FLDS, right? The living prophet was the guy who was
Yeah, different
basically
guy.
he just basically had the monopoly on women, right? And that's kind of how the society, at least in the FLDS, not necessarily. I don't know, but he
Right.
like, and then he would kind of like give other men who did what he wanted. He would then like get trade women basically with them to kind of give them status and power in that society, and it was kind of, and then one of his kids like became the living prophet after he passed away, right? They were like, oh yeah, I'm the living prophet now.
And that was the guy that was actually kind of more of the predator. It's almost like
Yeah, right.
the first guy probably really believed it, and the second guy
Yeah,
possibly. Well, he of course knew what he
I
was
think he
doing. It's
probably
like
did believe it, but I think he was more screwed up.
no, the second guy,
Or
he would like
manipulative.
go to Vegas and do things that were clearly against their
Mm.
rules, like right, like he's not following the same rules. Like so, I wouldn't say that
Yeah, I
you
get
could
what you're
say
saying, but
he's a.
do you not think he was convinced that something weird though? Like he probably didn't just like think, yeah, this is all bullshit, but at least it's a good gig. Like,
I think definitely there was probably some kind of justification in his head to live with himself, but um, I'm saying there's probably a level of integrity that his dad had, probably that he didn't. Warren Jeffs, that's who we're talking about, right? Um, we all do all kinds of things to justify things, I think. So I don't know, it's hard to get in the head of someone that like everyone agrees is a terrible person and then just leave it at that. And it's like, nah, it's probably more complicated than that. But yeah, it is weird looking at that. Well, what else was I going to say about that? I don't know. I just find it fascinating to like see what outsider perspectives of the culture is. It's interesting. Oh, one thing that I did want, this is what I wanted to mention. When I watched that documentary, it was fascinating because you see a lot of similarities, right? Because like obviously they branched off at some point, and we have the same religion if you go far enough back, and so you see a lot of similarities. But then it's fascinating seeing how it changed and how different. Like keep sweet and obey was not, that was
right,
their
not like a
set.
phrase.
Yeah, that's not a phrase from the mainline church, or I don't know what you want to call it, the Salt Lake City branch, the Brighamite
It just
branch.
it sounds creepy enough on its own without knowing anything about what was like
I know, right?
happening as well. Like,
Yeah, there are all kinds of phrases though, like that I think we said, like "Follow the Prophet" was like a song that we sang as little kids. So, um, yeah.
it's
So,
interesting to me the similarities between. I mean, I don't know much about your type of Mormonism, but that at least that type of Mormonism, and if you ever watch like Louis Theroux's documentaries on the Westboro Baptist Church, for example, where there's like one really strong kind of patriarchal figure who's the kind of leader of the group, and the way that the women are kind of like subjugated in the community, the way that the children are kind of like inculcated and socialized into the practices of the community, and given that it's interesting, like the similarities between that type of Christianity as well, and that I don't know that it's common to all cults, because there are definitely like more Eastern religion type cults where it's less like that, where there's like mass orgies and things, and it's very kind of different. But yeah, it's weird that there are those similarities.
yeah, it is interesting. All right, coming back to you. So, um, can you tell me, like what when you were practicing? How long were you practicing Christianity, and what did that look like? I'm just curious. For us, for example, you go to church once a week, and it's for 3 hours. Used to be three, and then two, and they have different activities during the week, and you volunteer to do things at church. Anyway, I don't know. What was it like for you?
I think I was practicing like 2 years. Obviously, after I deconverted, I wasn't really regularly going to church the same way, but I still like
Oh,
would
you still
attend
went
church.
after you feel like you deconverted.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, for like 2 or 3 years, but every so often, like maybe every 3 months, and then maybe I'd like have a burst of going for a couple of weeks, and then I'd stop again, and it'd be too weird, and like so it's like that for a few years after. But there were 2 years where when I was like in and like going all the time, so I'd go every Sunday, sometimes twice on a Sunday to both services. Sunday, I suppose, is like the main event, right? And then there would be like people would host meals and things afterwards on a Sunday, and you'd like go to those and talk to people. In the week, there'd be like home groups. So you go to like home groups and study the Bible and talk about stuff. People, some guy who's just watched porn and feels guilty would be like, pray for me.
Mm.
People's like interpersonal issues and dramas and things would kind of come up, but in Christianese language rather than being like, fully kind of articulated. Pray for my kids. They've gone to university. I'm not sure if they're remaining faithful. Those sorts of things.
Hmm.
Friday Bible study as well. And those were like the main things really that were all a part of the church. And then in terms of like personal devotion, there were various things that I do. So I try and like read the Bible first thing in the morning before going to work and pray. Try to read the Bible or something theologically related at lunchtime at work. I actually set up a Bible study at work because I wanted to evangelize to people and stop them going to hell. Um, in the evening as well, I'd like read the Bible, watch like apologetics content and stuff on YouTube, listen to hymns all the time and sing along to hymns, practice playing the piano, like piano hymns and things like that.
Hmm.
So just kind of thoroughly sort of uh, constantly kind of enriching myself in Christian type stuff. I don't know, filling my head with all the ideas, trying to um, obey what God wanted all the time and keep praying and things like that, trying to influence the world in the way that I thought the religion advocated for. And then also like a lot of shame and guilt around things as well, because, like as a 21-year-old guy, you wake up horny a lot, right? And
Hmm.
like feeling really guilty about that sort of thing, or like feeling guilty about like looking at a woman when I'm driving. And so like I remember like driving past a woman jogging in leggings, and I was like, don't look at her butt, don't look at, like, please, like, God help me not. And then like I looked in the rearview mirror at her butt when I come past, and I was like, like so annoyed at myself and stuff. That sort of thing.
Huh. So your time that you were kind of still going when you were uh so there was a time there that you were like physically and mentally out. That's a PMO. That's a phrase that we use a lot.
Okay.
So there was a phase of that then.
Yeah, for sure. Like that after the conversation I had with Doug, I actually physically felt sick for a few days. Like I was
Mm.
just lying in bed and watching like all of his videos. And I think the feeling sick was like, oh, was it's like the house of cards fell down type feeling, of like, was everything that I believed like bullshit? What the hell? How can I deal with this? And yeah, I was just like lying there watching all his stuff, like, oh my God, like I can't deal with all this. And then I think after that, it just became increasingly hard for me to like participate in church, but like for conflicting reasons. Like one of them was because I kind of felt sinful, and so was thinking, well, like I'm not in God's good graces or whatever. Like I don't want to be in like the presence of God in this or like I didn't want to take communion and stuff because I I like felt bad about sin. Um, but then another thing
Okay,
was,
can I?
yeah, go ahead.
So you, after your second conversation with Doug, like you felt like the house of cards fell down.
Probably after the first conversation was when it began. Like that's when I got the sick feeling.
Okay, so I'm curious. Your how do I word this? Like, was the story you were telling yourself at that point not that the house of cards had fallen down? Like, obviously, you made that one response video, so you weren't telling yourself that. Like, how would you describe that? Would you describe it as like two parts of
Cognitive
yourself?
dissonance.
Well,
Yeah.
I feel like I have that still though. Like, I feel like sometimes, like I'm hoping we have. I don't know how much time you have. If you'll let me go longer than an hour, but
Yeah, don't. Yeah, sure.
I want to get into like the Jordan Peterson stuff. And when you're criticizing, the little corner of the internet people, there, there's this part of me that agrees
Poor
with you,
guys.
right?
Yeah.
Like there, I understand what you're saying, and there's part of me that agrees, but then there's this other part of me that I don't. I don't agree, right? And that's kind of the side that I end up landing on, but I wouldn't call
Well,
it
that doesn't have to be. It doesn't
uncomfortable,
have to be
right?
cognitive dissonance.
Right.
So what you're describing there doesn't. It can just be like, oh, I can sort of like see both sides have got some good points, whatever. I mean, that doesn't have to be like cognitive dissonance. What I mean
Yeah.
by cognitive dissonance is
Oh no, I
where,
understand. I'm just
yeah,
wondering, I guess I'm just wondering, why does it have to be cognitive dissonance and not something like that? Like what I guess what's
so it definitely, it wasn't like, oh, both sides have good points, because of how much my personal identity was invested in the beliefs that I had.
okay.
And now I had these new beliefs simultaneously at the same time that were in conflict with the beliefs that were really important for me to identify with. And so I was just kind of going haywire trying to figure out a way of like meshing the two together. And that's if you know, like when you look at the sort of like cognitive dissonance psychology stuff, it's all about how invested someone is in those beliefs that then they're exposed to like some falsifying information of, as to how susceptible they are to sort of adopting some like crazy new auxiliary belief. So if someone's like personal reputation, social reputation, their self-worth or whatever is really invested in in those initial commitments, that's when it becomes much easier to believe something about like Jesus have it like a miracle or so whatever, right, than it does to believe, oh, I was like a silly person who believed a silly thing, whatever.
I guess my thing is I have a hard time framing it like that because I guess I still feel like I'm that silly person. Like I don't know that I've graduated somehow and now I'm some kind of rational person because now I
Well, I
don't
don't think
believe in
that either.
Mormonism. You know what I mean? But I
I don't think that either. I'm just not really that personally invested in the
you don't take it personally if someone like
yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah, if
not part
someone's
your
like, "Oh,
identity. That part
yeah,
makes
like
sense to me.
you're wrong about, actually there is a good reason to think that God exists." It's like, "Oh, cool, like I'll think about it." Like
Right, right.
it's not yeah.
Yeah, I know
It's not
yeah,
like, "No, it can't be. It can't be that way. No, it mustn't." Like, yeah.
that's true. Um, all right. I appreciate that because I was just kind of curious what it was like for you practicing Christianity and I guess the other thing I was wondering, when was the moment that you entertained the idea that like it might be wrong, like that
Mm.
you know that you might, does that make like I feel like
Yeah.
there was a moment where I can still remember like where I was like, I don't think that Joseph Smith did what he claimed to do. Like I don't think
Mm.
that's right. But even then after that I was still practicing for like 3 years after that. So
Honestly, it's going to be really difficult, I think, for me to like pinpoint an exact moment. I
so there
remember
wasn't like a
like
one thing.
so I mean there sort of was like there were things that, for example, when I talked to Doug, it just left me with like an icky feeling that wouldn't go away. That's how, but it wasn't,
There
but actually
wasn't.
having that thought, maybe Christianity is false, maybe God isn't there, whatever, that came much later for me because I just felt so guilty about thinking it, or like I just couldn't bring myself to like actually cognize that thought. I just had the feeling of like something being off for a long time. I think something some further things that cause me cognitive dissonance, and of course Christians who are watching this are going to go, obviously it's just because you sinned and lost the Holy Spirit, but was when I was outside of the, when I was questioning the morality of the religion, I began to like do things like have sex with people and stuff like that, right? And I was like, oh, actually that doesn't make me a terrible person, that isn't bad. But then I had like these deep feelings of guilt from the religion of like, no, I've done a terrible thing, I'm like a horrible, awful person. um like that caused me a lot of cognitive dissonance as well, because I was like, well, on the one hand I've got this experience of, no, that was just a thing, it was all right, and on the other hand I've got this like belief of, no, that would make me a terrible person, it's people who do this are evil. And I sort of like couldn't shake those feelings of like, well, you've betrayed God, but actually everything was all right, and why can't you just be like happy with like having had a nice time and be like normal and healthy about it? So sort of thing also, like drove me to question like the moral claims, because I'd got very wrapped up in moralizing because as a result of my religion, like thinking that people who were gay were like evil, thinking that like when IKEA have LGBT flags on their like bags that you can buy at the checkout, that's like a sign of the end times coming soon, or some like thing like that. And so kind of like having those really strong moral prejudices like challenged by experience was kind of like, something that unsettled me, because because I was thinking, well, people who do this are evil, and then I actually came to find, no, people who do this aren't actually evil. They're just like me. It's not that bad. It's just like people enjoying each other, so who cares? Yeah.
So do you? So okay, shoot. I'm kind of going back in the timeline here. What motivated you to like try to be a Christian apologetic, like get into Christian apologetics? Because that's why you have that first video, right?
Yeah, I think it's just because well, probably I don't, when I say just, I don't know that there's like going to be one simple thing. Part of it is that I'm interested in things intellectually kind of anyway, right? And so I'm curious. And when I discovered Christianity, it sort of provided me with a wealth of just new information, opened a bunch of doors to a bunch of stuff that was super interesting historically, politically, um, like literary criticism, history of the Bible, theology is like a discipline, philosophy is a discipline, things I'd never really gone into in any depth. It just opened all this stuff up to me to try and synthesize together. So that was like really sort of enticing for me as a person, for my psychology. I think another thing is probably a slight sense of intellectual inferiority. So having kind of like messed up my A levels at the end of high school, because of personal circumstances, not gone to like some amazing uni to do like a really prestigious course in like uh, computer science or physics or whatever, and instead be doing a degree apprenticeship and working. Um, I think I kind of felt like I hadn't fulfilled my intellectual potential or something, and there was a sense of inferiority there or something. And I felt this need to kind of like prove myself through learning all this stuff. And that's partly, I think, what attracted me about Peterson, was because the way he talks, it gives the impression that he's read, like the entire Western canon of like every philosopher, and is intimately familiar with all of their positions and knows all about history and knows all about theology. And I was like, I want to
And
be like
has the
that. Like I
correct
want to.
perspective on it.
Yeah, right. And I was kind of thinking, I want to be the type of person that's like that, and that kind of appealed to me. And then there was this sense of kind of like inferiority, and it was, and apologetics does sell itself like this, I think, where it's like, well, you kind of like get some 2 cent kalam cosmological argument, some fine tuning argument, right? And now you can talk to most people who don't care about any of this stuff and make them sound stupid. And I think there's a bit of that to apologetics, like a kind of inferiority complex type thing.
Yeah, I didn't. So the apologetic space doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I was never actively engaged in my religion and participating in any kind of apologetics. So it's hard for me to understand that. Like I couldn't steel man that. You know what I mean? Because I just don't understand it. A lot
I
of the
mean, there's
apologetics
definitely
that I got
people.
into, by the time I got into it, just felt so underwhelming. And I was like, you're not addressing my problem here. You're not answering my question. Like, and it started making me feel like there was no place for me within the religious paradigm, because I wasn't hearing my concerns being like met, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think there are definitely some people in apologetics who are there like out of genuine curiosity, and they've just ended up in that space, right? But there's also a lot
You're
of
right. There
people in
are
that
some that
space.
have like good conversations that are fun to listen to, even from this side of it. Yeah, that's true.
And there's a lot of people in that space as well, where it's more kind of performative, where it's about almost projecting a sense of power, a sense of intellectual dominance. So I think you get this with a lot of William Lane Craig stuff, a lot of Capturing Christianity stuff, where if you just kind of watch for what's being said, a lot of the time it will be emphasizing this is serious intellectual endeavor. This is a serious philosophical problem that I'm raising. This is, and it's like all what I'm hearing when I hear that is take me seriously. This is, like I'm a big boy too. I'm up here with the physicists, and I think a lot of what's done around formalizing arguments, so using like Bayes' theorem, using certain like different types of logic, including like modal logics and things, talking
That
about
stuff,
physics in order
I'm
to
I've never been interested in that logic stuff. I really
well,
haven't.
but I think it's all superfluous to religion, and I think it's about puffing up your chest. I think that that's why a lot of that stuff exists. It's like a show of force and a display of masculine intellectuals sort of like flexing to try and intimidate, to try and resolve maybe some of the kind of like issues that people have fundamentally, believing like a guy rose from the dead or whatever.
Yeah, maybe. I guess given that we kind of admitted, like I think we did in a few minutes ago, that there are some apologetics that have like decent conversations that are at least interesting, whether you agree with whoever's talking or not. And then you've also got content that's like not that. I want to go back because I think I framed all apologetics in a certain way. Or is it just that there is a spectrum of different types of people within every paradigm? You know what I mean? Like, is a is the is the content of apologetics worse than average? Like, is that fair?
Yeah, I think like
Do you understand what I'm
apologetics. So apologetics generally I view as like really shit philosophy, basically, like substandard, crappy philosophy. Though there are some people in that space who I think are worthwhile people to talk to, like people who would disagree with me and are apologists, and I think there were, but the vast majority of people and most of those people would be more cautious about using the term apologist, just because they're self-aware enough to realize that when they use that term, they're like they're almost aligning themselves with the Frank Turek's of the world, right?
saying?
And they wouldn't want to do that because they tend to be quite self-reflective people, the type of people that I think are worth talking to on these topics who disagree. Whereas, the majority of people in that space, I think, are quite unlike that. Their only concern is resolving their own cognitive dissonance, appearing to have these really strong arguments. They don't really care about figuring out what's true. They just care about accumulating a bunch of weapon, or obscuring. They don't care about making progress or clarifying things. They just want to learn terminology in order to make things more obscure and difficult, impenetrable for the person who disagrees with them. Um, and I just hate all that stuff. I can't stand it. It's sophistry at its worst. It's all of, because there is interesting stuff, right, to be done around theology, and you can have great conversations about it and learn all sorts about the world, but all of that crap just gets in the way. It's like shit in the pipeline that just won't,
Yeah.
won't go through. Yeah, it gums it up.
I could take that bit that you just said uh, 30 seconds ago and apply that to political discourse
Yeah.
online and all kinds of stuff online from every point of view. That's what I was trying to get at. Like, is this an apologetics problem, or is this just like an echo chamber problem where it's like, hey, we're going to get on here and explain why the position we already
Yeah.
hold is awesome?
I see what you're saying. I do think that there is an explicitly apologetic centered problem that I see. It tends to be because apologetics attracts young men who feel this sort of need to defend their religion and make it rational to everyone else and stuff like that. And then
I
I
don't think
think
they
that
make it
there's
rational
that,
to everyone else, though. Like,
though,
they,
well,
they,
I'm not saying that, denying that there are political streamers who are like that as well, by the way.
no, what I'm saying is,
Oh,
I don't think that they try. My opinion is that a lot of apologetics help people stay, but it doesn't convert. Like, it doesn't convince
yes,
anybody
right.
from the outside, right? So, um,
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I think that's what it's for. That's what so Helen de Cruz, who's a Christian philosopher of religion, she's done quite a lot of empirical work and cognitive science of religion stuff, and she says this, that apologetics basically exists just to resolve the cognitive dissonance of believers. Like that's what apologetics is there for. So
Mhm. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Um,
and I think it's right. Like that's what I see. It's not, it's not about trying to work with someone you disagree with to figure out who's right. It's very polemical in nature. It's very um political almost in nature, like the way that someone like Cameron Bertuzzi of Capturing Christianity or Braxton Hunter, the way that they sort of create narratives for their audience about, that things that are happening in the discourse and stuff like that. It's all about kind of like controlling a particular discourse and selling it so you can sell this story of that makes sense from the theological point of view of the evil atheists and what they're up to. So, I mean, you even saw it when, well, I don't know that you've seen this, but when James and James, who I mentioned earlier, did our video on Andrew Loke's book, where we went through the entire book with Kamil, talking about various problems with his approach to the resurrection. And in a private Facebook group, they were talking about how we were collaborating with the Muslims to try and like take people away from the faith, or whatever. It's like, I've never even talked to Jake, the Muslim metaphysician, and yet Andrew Loke's like, yeah, it's a conspiracy of yeah, and so you can see how, I don't know, there's like this almost like inherent paranoia, and again like the sectarianism, and atheists fall foul of this as well, right? I'm not just saying that.
I
I'm not
just think
saying
people like that's what I'm saying. Like a lot of these criticisms, I have a hard time putting a Christian or apologetic label on it because I just see it as a human issue.
Yeah, I think you could be right. I think what it is that for me, apologists tend to be people who sort of unashamedly endorse all of these biases and things, right? Whereas
Yeah,
I see a lot of
that's
the more
true.
reflective Christian philosophers shying away from that label and being like, you know what? I'm a Christian philosopher. I'm not an apologist. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I have a tendency to be like a little too benefit of the doubt with stuff. And there is something that I would say that I didn't really get from church. And I'm not sure necessarily you're supposed to get it from church, but when that idea of making sure that you engage with criticism was definitely like, and I think that is what creates a house of cards. Like, I think there are thoughtful people that wrestle with these things. And I think they have a stronger foundation with their beliefs. Um,
Mm,
but I didn't engage with criticism because I felt like I had to strengthen my belief before I could engage. And because I could never strengthen my belief enough, like I couldn't, like I wasn't disciplined enough to read my scriptures every day, I could
mm,
never get my belief strong enough to engage with criticism. So it
right.
becomes this,
Okay.
yeah. But there are people that do, um, like when I interviewed John Vervaeke, that's kind of one of the things that we talked about was it's not super useful in my mind to like paint one group of people as like rational and another group of people not, because I do think there are wise and thoughtful people that
Yeah.
practice religion. I guess like it just doesn't seem
Well, I don't think I'm doing
reasonable.
that. I just
Well,
I don't know if you're saying yeah.
no. Um, I guess I just want to explicitly say that I don't
Yeah.
think that, and I do feel like that is a common belief of if people are going to view atheists from the outside, that's what they think
Sure.
atheists think.
Right. I want to be. I'm actually very. I think there's a type of atheism that kind of deifies. I mean, even like earlier when you were saying that's objective and this is subjective. Whenever I hear the word objective, I sort of like, it's kind of like a trigger word for me, right? Because I
I'm
don't
just
think.
trying to convey,
Yeah.
like,
I'm not trying to
I
have a
feel
go at
like
you.
I understand.
Yeah.
When I say that, I understand what you're saying. Like, I've gone down
Yeah.
that rabbit hole of thought, but I think as far as what people mean by it, I mean, I, there is objective reality. Like, I can't just walk through that door, right? Like, and
So
that's what I'm talking
yeah,
about.
and I understand how you're using it, and I'm not bringing this criticism against you. I think you see this too, that there's this sort of, there is a type of atheism though that's very over, it's like this very overly simplified outlook on reality, which is kind of like, um well, there's just simply this truth out there. There's no nuance or complexity to anything. None of these questions are difficult. And then there's these like kind of almost really like shitty evolutionary psychology answers that explain religion. They tend to be like really bad explanations. They're just a bunch of just so stories, but it's like, yeah, you just believe in Sky Daddy because, and then, you know, insert like some kind of crappy like Michael Shermer article in Nature from 2012 about agency detection and patternicity or something, right? And not actually engage with any of the genuine psychological attempts to find out whether like that sort of finding is like robust. Look at the data and stuff. Instead, it's just this fucking article by Michael Shermer talking about it in published in Nature, and it becomes so overly simplistic, so political. So people that I'm talking about here, or communities would be like atheist community of Austin type atheists, like Matt Dillahunty type atheists, and it's just like a really dogmatic, shoddy, simple worldview. It's almost like everything that was wrong with fundamentalism, in terms of like the ferocity, the evangelism, the lack of openness to disconfirming evidence. All of that crap is still there, but now every single belief is just defined by exactly the polar opposite of what it once was. So, oh, we wanted nuclear families, and like we were anti-abortion. Sorry, yeah, and we were anti-abortion. So now we're just vehemently pro-abortion, and we want like people to just have like free relationships whenever and maybe never get married. And it's like everything's just defined as the opposite of that, but you're just as like shitty a person when it comes to talking with about any of these ideas or any of that sort of stuff. So you know, you've not become more open, you've not become better at assessing evidence, you've not developed any of these like epistemic virtues that I think are good for guiding you towards truth. And I think that there are a lot of atheists like this who are just as bad as like fundamentalists in my book.
I really like that. Like, it's just not useful to try to group people together and like simplify it like that, because it's just not that simple. It's just, yeah. There are people I admire from that are atheists, and there are people that I admire that are Latter-day Saints. Like, it's just not useful to group that kind of group, I guess. But
Yeah, there's a lot I like about religions and like the things that they teach, and the, you know, even as someone who doesn't currently believe that any of the religions are sort of like true in the claims that they make about the way reality is, whatever, I think that there are a lot of really beautiful things in like Islam and in Christianity. Don't know as much about Mormonism, but yeah, like I can take a lot from that still.
sure. I guess that's a good segue. So let's get into some of the criticism you have of let me so there's Jordan Peterson, Paul Vanderklay. I haven't watched as much stuff on his channel except for like when you're engaged with it. um and then Jonathan Pajot. I'm trying to think of other people, even Joe Rogan. Like, you
Yeah.
have some strong criticisms of these gurus, right? John Vervaeke. So that is actually, I feel like those, maybe not Joe Rogan, but the little corner of the internet people, I feel like they are kind of in that same space that we were just talking about. Like, they say they're basic. I've heard John Vervaeke say this. He doesn't consider himself an atheist. He says he's a non-theist, and I think I heard him say this once. But he basically, the way I understood it, described the apologetics atheist YouTube channel fight as just they're asking the wrong question. So he's just
Yeah,
like
but that's some
he's not
fucking
he's not
makes me
interested. He's not interested in um he's just not
But
interested
it's a
in that.
guru. But the way, see the way how he phrased that, right? It's like a guruism. It's like, and I've got the right question for you. It's like, no,
Mm-hmm.
like those guys have got it wrong because they're just being like dicks to each other. But it's not like, and now I've got the deeper truth. You know, it's like it's still that same like you know, it's like Joseph Smith type thing, right? Of, you know, the Christians, they're all debate, but they're asking the wrong question.
Mm-hmm.
I've got the right question. You know, it's like it's still that same type of thing. Like that's one of the things that gets me about like the way that the kind of guru types are, right? Is that I don't find them to just be to be exhibiting the type of epistemic virtues in any of these fields that I would want for like someone who's just seeking truth. So like, and what I mean by seeking truth is to figure out what's the correct view of the history of these various religions, what's the correct view when it comes to the philosophy of these various religions, what's the correct view in just systematizing what the sciences have to tell us, and the distinction between the sciences and what the types of claims that theology might make. I don't see these types of people as kind of like using the correct methodologies that good and responsible inquirers should be using when it comes to instead I see them as kind of like using poetic ways of talking about things that are replete with metaphors, again creating sectarian communities of us versus them, and those sectarian communities are very resistant to disagreement. This is in my experience, so I find it very difficult to actually talk to people in those communities about claims that I disagree about without them becoming incredibly defensive or banning or blocking me or various things like that, muting me and like so they can like monologue. The same as like same treatment I might get of like Darth Dawkins in a Discord server I've got in like John Vervaeke's server from people like Mark Lefevre, for example. And yeah, and I see there being a lot of these like kind of the pseudo profound bullshit claims, like meaningless statements that sound profound, like the papers called the psychology papers called pseudo profound bullshit. So I'm not just saying that as like a pejorative. That can sound quite meaningful, but are really just poetry, and just often getting like lost in metaphor, making claims that are historically false about the thought of philosophers, about like religious movements, and all this stuff just again just winds me up when I come to listen to people like Vervaeke or Peterson, because there are scholars out there who are doing what they claim to be doing but are doing it very well and exhibiting these types of virtues. And I would just much rather people spent their time like listening to those people or reading those people than like
I'd be
engaging with like.
curious who you're referring to. I'm
So one person I'm thinking of might be like Karen Armstrong, for example. She's one. Like Helen de Cruz, who I mentioned earlier. Like Kenny Pearce, who's a theist. He's a great philosopher. Again, knows so much about like Berkeley, so much about Kant. Same with Helen de Cruz when it comes to Kant. Eleanor Stump, who's a Catholic philosopher, someone who's so much better to engage with. Ian Mills and Laura Robinson when it comes to like history of the New Testament, from a Christian perspective. Kamil, again, being great on the history, but from like an atheist perspective. Listening to, like in terms of like YouTube channels, there's like a channel called Philosophy Overdose, for example, or someone like Kane Baker or Joe Schmid from Majesty of Reason. The type of things that they're putting forward from the philosophy of religion perspective are just going to be so much better, and also so much more accurate, particularly when it comes to expounding the philosophies of historical thinkers, which Peterson just frequently bastardizes, particularly when it comes to Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, and Kant.
give me a. So I didn't recognize. I know Kamil, but that's more from a just hanging around this Pine Creek.
I think Don Cupitt as well is someone who did, in my view, what Peterson was sort of like trying to do when he first started the psychological interpretation of the biblical series lectures. I think that's become more broadly wrapped up in a political project now, which is, like why the second installment of those lectures is hosted on Daily Wire with Ben Shapiro and Dennis Prager present as, but
Right. Well,
I
I
think
guess
what he was initially trying to do was done far better by Don Cupitt in terms of coming to understand the state of modern religion through the lens of the way that like science interacted with it and historical thought kind of led up to the current position where people are kind of jaded with religion and feel this tension between the sciences and religion.
Do you think, if you were to summarize kind of, you say they're trying to do the same thing, what is that? And then how are they doing it better?
So the same thing would be providing a kind of analysis of the historical causes of our contemporary culture's relationship to religion, and then looking at the various ways of living with our contemporary culture's understanding of religion now, right? So I think what Jordan Peterson is sort of trying to do
That's a
is
pretty
say,
like
hit.
that's a pretty like materialistic. So someone just kind of saying, I don't know, that doesn't feel like the same thing. I guess is what I think Jordan Peterson's trying to do.
Well, maybe you can tell me if you disagree, but in my view, part of what is so appealing to people about Jordan Peterson is he doesn't just kind of like come out and say something like, well, God says like Israel should have a home, and so it's fine for them to treat people in Palestine this way. I'm not saying that's Peterson's views on the Palestine-Israel situation. I'm just saying that's how, you know, a classically understood theologian maybe might make a kind of political claim or something. Whereas the way that Peterson approaches theology is he'll kind of be like, well, look, here's a snake in Genesis. Well, snake detection circuitry is really old in the brain. And so here's some kind of like plausible story about the connection between really primitive human psychology and the way that we process our perception, and why snakes might be really meaningful in a story that's teaching us eternal moral values or something. So it kind of provides the theological content, which is this moral claim about the story of Genesis, maybe, with a kind of scientific justification. Even if it's quite a loose link, the scientific justification being, well, look, like it's reasonable that snakes be used as this kind of foil in a moral story because snake detection circuitry is really low in the brain, and humans have an evolutionary history that includes snakes thousands of years back. So it's not so anti-scientific now. You know, it's not pure theology now. Now there's a bit of like science involved, and I think that
But
that's kind of the
that's
allure to a
weird.
lot of people.
That's weird that that bothers you so much because it's not like the important part of what he's trying to say. Like when he's talking about snakes, he's talking about it from a psychological perspective, right?
Well, I think that the claims
What
he's making about psychology there are just really not very careful, and he's often just kind of telling a bunch of just so stories, mixing together random facts, right? And that's a
don't you think
problem
there's kind
for me.
of like patterns that are worth like noticing? Like let me give you an
I mean,
example.
that's a very vague statement. Like
Let me give you an
cancer.
example. That's why
Yeah,
I'm going to give you an example.
yeah.
So,
Sorry. You go. Yeah.
um, when I think of my kind of going through belief, I had some opportunities where I could have maybe not had such a house of cards, right? Like I noticed there was something that intrigued me, um, and I call it a snake in my going through practicing my belief. And I ignored the snake, and then it got worse. It didn't fix the problem. It just got bigger, right? And so
Why do you call it a snake? Sorry, like I'm not sure what.
so I think that's in the story that he was talking about. That's what he was talking about. He was saying if you don't address snakes, then they they don't go away. Like you have to
Well,
address the snakes in your life, right?
why not an elephant, right? Like there's a turn of phrase, the elephant in the room. That's pretty popular with English language
That's
speakers.
isn't that talking about something else though?
I don't think so. I think that's talking about things like when people say there's an elephant in the room, they tend to mean that there's something that needs to be addressed that's like really big, but everyone's kind of ignoring it, right? Or
Yes.
something. Do you think
The,
that's slightly different to what you were saying about
yeah.
snakes? Okay,
Yeah. A snake would be
misunderstood then.
something like um I'm training for a marathon and I kind of have a tweak in my leg. And I think it might mean that I'm getting a stress fracture or something like that.
Mm.
And I ignore it and I keep running. And then I get a full blown on stress fracture. Like that would be a snake is something that
Mm.
you get a warning or you see it, you notice it, but you ignore it.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a problem
With it.
still later.
So
It
I
doesn't go
think the
away.
case you've said there, right, is like imagine I'm your friend and I know you're training for a marathon, and you start telling me all these symptoms of like a stress fracture, and I might say, look, you're ignoring the elephant in the room here, which is that you've got a stress fracture and you have to pull out of this marathon race. Like I think so. I think it could
Mhm.
be used there, but the point is that the point I'm trying to make is that what we've got here is a metaphor, right? And as long as people take your metaphor the right way, it doesn't matter what animals or lack of animals or symbolism or whatever you use in the metaphor.
Sure. So it bothers you, not that he uses the metaphor in the psychological way and says, "Hey, in your psychology, your whatever. I don't know.
Well, first,
Your
so the first thing that
psychology
bothers me,
your psychology is going to bring attention to you things that you need to address, and if you don't address them, it's just going to get worse. That part doesn't bother you. It's that he
yeah.
tries to tie it in and validate his claim with, "Hey, this makes sense that this really old story with wisdom in it survived because and was passed down orally because snakes are,
Mm.
really far down or whatever."
So that,
That's
I
what
think there are
bothers me.
three, yeah, three parts that bother me there. One is the actual empirical claim itself, where I think Peterson is someone who frequently engages in something called neurobolics, which is just saying neurological sounding terms in order to tell people stories that sound like they're scientific about people's brains and things. And there's a great blog called Neurobolics about this. That takes apart a lot of these types of claims that people make.
Mhm.
And I think that when it comes to a lot of this stuff, especially the type of stuff that Peterson's saying, he's often really, really, really stretching studies where it's not even clear how robust those studies are in the first place a lot of the time, but into like ordinary cases where they might not be able to tell us anything meaningful. So the claims about like snake detection circuitry, various claims he's made about like rats and lobsters and things like that. It's just not clear how far you can even stretch those things, even if the findings are very robust amongst like rodents or whatever, right? So that's it. So the empirical claim is what is one issue in the way that empirical data might be being used. Second issue is a metaphysical one, and it's the way that Peterson then essentializes the type of like symbols that feature in his theological explanation. So like the snake or whatever, he basically ties these claims that he's making about people's psychology in the biblical stories into like essentializing characterizations of human psychology. And I think that maybe they could be right for a lot of people in a lot of circumstances, but I just don't think that they're like essentially and universally correct in the way that Peterson sort of claims. And then I forget what the third issue was, but it was something more theological. It was something like it was something that kind of like bounces off of the two, where people kind of feel then vindicated in really forcefully believing this stuff. So to the point of like engaging in political action or whatever, because they think that all the science and like God himself then agrees with the kind of like beliefs that they form as the
Mm.
upshot of these processes. And so then there's like me thinking that that's kind of like a dangerous way for people to view the world, because it doesn't have a kind of like humility built into it that, you know, where I could be wrong, and that's the shortfall of this type of epistemology as well.
Hmm. Your third is not. I kind of understand your first two. Your third one is. I'm not understanding why that would be a concern, because I feel like the types of people that would take that seriously would actually probably have a problem with the way Jordan Peterson is saying evolution is real. Like I just don't.
Well,
I
how
there's
about
so
like Gen
many
6? Like the people who
January
went
6th.
into the yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Did I mean, how familiar are you with for how people in this space, firstly, so I'm talking about like people like Viveki, Vanderklay, etc., how they understood
You
the
think the
events that took
January
place in
6th
26?
type people are the same type of people listening to Jordan Peterson?
Yes. Yeah.
That's strange, because I feel like January 6th was like a subset. I'm not saying that none of them listen to Jordan Peterson, but like a ton of people listen to Jordan Peterson. So it's like, uh,
Mm.
I don't know that that's correlated at all.
Well, I'm not saying all people who listen to Jordan Peterson are, like pro-Trump and pro-January the 6th or anything like that. I think the claim that I'm making is a bunch of epistemic vices, like bad methodologies for thinking about things, that are being encouraged in the type of way that Jordan Peterson is approaching these topics, and Paul van der Clay and Peugeot and Viveki, and that those vices underpin the same conspiratorial thinking that leads people into like QAnon conspiracism, into like anti-vax conspiracism, into climate change. And I mean, these are all things that we have seen with Peterson himself over the past year or so, to the point of where he retweets, like fetish porn video of people getting their dicks milked by machines and says, this is what's happening in communist China, right? Which is kind of like beyond parody. But
I saw a thing about that on my Facebook feed, and I didn't actually go look at the original thing.
yeah.
Let me see if I can restate what you're saying here, and if I understand. So you are bothered that Jordan Peterson, it's not necessarily, well, your last bit would say this, but I'm going to jump back. Okay, you're concerned that the ways that he is convincing himself, or not himself, or justifying his ideas are not, they just don't meet up to like epistemological standards, and therefore people will use those same kinds of thinking. So it's not necessarily that someone is taking something that Jordan Peterson said and going and storming January 6th. You're saying the way he is thinking leads to conspiratorial type. It can lend a hand to conspiratorial type thinking.
Yeah, that's right. Obviously,
Okay.
I think some of the claims he's made are like problematic as well, but I think that they're less of a concern than the way that he's like training people to think about these topics, because then people can go off and do a lot of the damage themselves, right? And
Mhm.
then they get into like Andrew Tate and start and they start playing word association with all of these stereotypes, categories, and things that they formed, and um
Okay.
just end up with a whole bunch of weird things that they believe and ways that they act because of those beliefs.
Do you think that if the underlying things that he said you agreed with, and then he was still using those kinds of ways, it would still bother you? Can you think of anybody
Yes.
that you agree with that also does that same game?
Yeah. So there's a lot of people like in the atheist space who might broadly have like similar um beliefs to me about naturalism, for example, but where I think that the way that they got there is like using a bad methodology that will kind of leave them trapped in those beliefs if they face like disconfirming evidence or something. There are also a lot of people who might politically align with me in terms of having like fairly, I mean, I do in the UK, I consider myself a conservative with a small c, but like socially, I'm quite progressive. Um, and there are a lot of people who share like similar political beliefs to me, but I think that they got there through just like it kind of like being the popular thing to believe. I think that they would be very easily swayed by other things if other things were more popular. So if like fascism became super popular, I think they don't. And so I think it would be important for them to have the correct methodology to assess information pertaining to like political policy and political beliefs, because then they would be able to actually assess like the claims of fascists rather than just going along with it because it's like the popular thing, right?
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
Do you see any of the concerns that Jordan Peterson expresses that you agree with?
Yeah, this is something that's quite interesting in, a lot of his lectures, the ones about like communism and things like that. He actually talks about how a driving force for him was that he wanted to understand how collectively a society could kind of go wrong in such a bad way. And he says like a major motivation for him behind studying what he studied and teaching the courses that he does is to try and inoculate his students against ideology, right? And I remember the metaphor that he uses for ideology, which in the lectures that I watched all those years ago still, which is something like a kind of box through which all of your perceptions get kind of like forced through, and then they come out the other side kind of like formatted right through that box. And he said he wanted his lectures to inoculate people against that. Now that is kind of like a tragic story, right? Because of the way then that you see Peterson engaging with information now, where almost everything that he engages with is like retweets of really bad information or poorly interpreted information put into some like basically standard US sort of right-wing conspiracy theory type thing, either about like election fraud or climate change, or the World Economic Forum is trying to make everyone infertile, and everything, everything's like some mad right-wing Fox News type conspiracy theory, all the information that he processes. And he is, in my view, the exact type of victim of ideology that he sort of claimed he wanted to protect his students against, right, all those years ago, which is this sort of tragic irony for me.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure you would answer yes to, like, of course, there's a possibility that he is closer aligned to a good view of looking at the world versus how you're viewing the world, right? Like, it might not be a conspiracy. Would you?
Well, it
I mean,
depends what you mean by possibility, right? Because
well, I
so
mean,
there's a
right now
possibility I'm wrong.
I'm sitting across from you, and I don't know his. I'm not on Twitter really. I have a Twitter. I just recently created a Twitter account. I can't remember, but someone's asked me that before, and I didn't like that video. Right? Like, it
Yeah,
was
sure.
bizarre, and he was angry, and that's not my personality. That's not how I handle things. And so, from like, I don't see the usefulness of that. Like, I would much rather
Yeah.
try to have conversations with people and depict them in a way that they would accept. And Jordan Peterson does not do that for a lot of left-leaning political people. He just doesn't do that.
Do you not think, though, that video isn't quite just this one-off exception? So there were a number of videos around that, including like his message to Muslims, message to Christians, message to CEOs, videos that he made, like Q&As that he's done, where he's like complaining about COVID restrictions and stuff, talking about like how difficult it was for him to buy a skidoo. But what I want to sort of ask is, do you not see that same kind of vitriol, kind of, rather than a kind of even assessment of, well, I've got some criticisms of the way the government's handled this, but instead a sort of like quite narcissistic breakdown, like a viciousness coming out, where so
Narcissistic
yeah.
is like so overused, so I don't really know that I would label anybody narcissistic in a public sphere. But I will say, um, that vitriol is definitely there, and the reason I give him the benefit of the doubt is because I see the same problem. I'm trying to handle it differently, but I see the same problem that he sees, and he is angry about it. So I don't know how being angry about it helps. Like, I don't think that helps. Like, I think probably the biggest problem in most online spaces, maybe it's in real life, it's an elephant in the room and nobody talks about what they disagree with. They just don't talk about it. That's how they have good relationships. And then on
Well,
online spaces, they also don't talk to each other either. And they just end up in these echo chambers that reinforce what they already believe, but they don't actually engage the steel man of the other side, I guess. You're frozen a little bit.
my internet cut out, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
I was going to say that a lot of the people in that kind of heterodox intellectual dark web space love to talk about how they love to talk about having disagreements, and never actually do talk about any of the things that they disagree about. Like it's this kind of
That's
like
true. No, that's so true.
yeah.
I've come.
They're like,
I agree.
no one else
Totally,
can have these conversations.
I totally agree. But I will say, like, in order to have like a good relationship with someone, like, I feel like even online and in a conversation, I feel like you do have to spend more time on talking about stuff you agree with than what you disagree with. So it might be frustrating that you're not just getting into it.
So it could be right, but look at so I
That's
think maybe the only example I can think of recently of an actual disagreement being talked about between two of these IDW figures is Sam Harris's appearance on Lex Friedman's podcast.
mhm.
And even then, Sam was still treading on eggshells around some of these topics, like trying to say that, oh yeah, like Trump had a bunch of good points about this, like particular really controversial thing, or, oh, what's the, oh, I don't know, like, 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 I the origins of COVID conspiracy theory, the lab leak conspiracy theory.
That's a conspiracy theory?
Yeah. Yeah, that's being pushed by a lot of people like
Isn't
Steve
it just
Bannon type.
isn't it just a theory? Like, why is it a conspiracy
Oh,
theory?
because it's linked into um, a set of like a conspiracy, right? Of the well, it depends on there's a few different ones, but either a conspiracy of the Chinese government to do something, conspiracy of the World Economic Forum to do something around
No,
population
I
control, or
I wouldn't. I don't think that's a steel man though, because I think the fact that it escaped from a lab is the lab leak theory.
well, so you can do this for any conspiracy theory.
Uh-huh.
You can say this is the X theory and just talk about what the content of that theory is. The reason I'm characterizing it as a conspiracy theory is one, because it's not something that's believed by the consensus of experts, right? That none of the agencies, the minority of agencies in the US who are investigating this have a low confidence probability assessment in it. The majority of agencies believe in natural origins. In terms of the orthodox scientists who are looking into various markers and things around it coming from a lab, again, consensus is that it's natural origins, and most of the evidence points in that direction. There's very few heterodox thinkers on the fringe who think that it came from a lab, and it's predominantly being pushed by people who believe that again, in like either religious type explanations for why COVID happened, or population control type explanations, or like deep state type action.
This is crazy.
Yeah, well, that's
I don't know any of these conspiracy theories, but I don't want to go too far into this because there's kind of bigger picture stuff that I want to talk about, but we'll leave that there if that's okay. Like I disagree.
yeah,
Uh,
sure.
the oh shoot, what were we? So there was something
Or
else.
particularly like Brett Weinstein. Yeah, he like Brett Weinstein is, in my view, again like just a conspiracy theorist right now. He's not got like
Oh
any
yeah, we were talking about
credibility as
people disagreeing and having conversations and uh, so I agree that a lot of times people that are, for example, you'll hear an ex-Mormon and Mormon talk in but they agree politically, and so the only thing they talk about is politics, but they actually won't talk about theology, or vice versa. You'll have two. Do you know what I mean? Like, so it's like, oh, look, we can talk to people that we disagree with, but they actually only talk about the things they agree with. So yeah, that's definitely something that can be irritating for sure, and doesn't help. So
well.
going back to
Well,
like
my
my big
criticism
picture.
of the IDW people would be that they genuinely, I don't think, really ever have these conversations about like the actual things that they disagree about. They always say, so the phrase is always, we can talk about the things that we disagree about, but never does like Lex talk to Joe Rogan about maybe like good reasons to think that mRNA vaccines aren't harmful, or that like, governments making decisions around trying to control the spread of COVID might be a good idea or something. Like never is there pushback around those things. Someone made a fairly good post actually about, so like one of the things that Lex Friedman likes to talk about is how having like loving conversations will solve like all the political problems and like culture war problems. But you have to look at the people that he chooses to shine his love beams on, and the people that he doesn't choose to shine his love beams on, right? And
Was
it's
that
pretty
like
much
episode 52 of Decoding the Gurus? I listened to the first hour so far of the Robin DiAngelo Decoding the Gurus. That's episode 52. And
oh, okay.
um, anyway, the first 20 minutes, maybe, or 30 minutes is him talking about how.
Oh, here we go. This is, the post was actually on the Sam Harris sub. So the post just says, much has already been said about Lex Friedman's pathetic performance in yesterday's interview, but one more thing I think is telling is to look at who Lex
What's the
vociferously
one he's
defends.
talking about? yesterday? What was?
Um,
Do you know what they're referring?
this is Sam Harris appearing on
Oh,
Lex
okay.
Friedman's
So this is more
podcast,
recent
and
then.
this is on the Sam Harris subreddit, and he says, so he's saying, like, look, he defends Kanye West, Elon Musk, Brett Weinstein, Joe Rogan, Trump, Jordan Peterson, but he's suspicious of the CEO of Pfizer, Bill Gates, Sam Harris, and Anthony Fauci. I hope this is the last time Sam associates with Lex. Um, Lex and Sam seem friendly, so it'll probably be a while before the cleavage happens, but it's very clear what audience he's playing to. The fact that he puts on such an act of impartiality while wanting to appeal to the conspiracy fringe indicates to me that he's aware of his dishonesty and not a worthwhile conversation partner.
I've got a question about that list of people that you gave me. I'm gonna have to go rewatch and kind of learn a little bit more about them. But would you say that anyone on that list of people would be more conservative leaning?
On which, you mean on the
Back when we were talking about Jordan Peterson and what he's trying to do to religion, you said there's other people doing it better.
Oh yeah, Eleanor Stump is pretty conservative. Don Cupitt, probably a bit more socially progressive. Actually, no idea about his economic views. I don't think he was a Marxist or anything. I don't know what he believed. I'm trying to remember who else I mentioned though. I think Ian Mills is probably pretty centrist, to be honest. Though I don't know. Laura, don't know, but I suspect she's more like progressive. Probably votes Democrat in the US. Arif Ahmed, someone who I think is worthwhile taking seriously in philosophy of religion from the atheist side. He's definitely quite conservative. He's actually been on Jordan Peterson's podcast, interestingly, but it was to talk about something. It was to talk about free speech. So Arif Ahmed, someone who talks about free speech a lot, and I thought it was quite a shame that then Arif Ahmed wasn't having a conversation with Peterson about like maybe challenging him on some of his religious claims, because I think Arif is someone who is in a great position to do that, but instead they were just talking about free speech stuff. Other people, like I think Roger Scruton has some interesting takes on religion. He's written quite a lot on conservatism as well. A lot of like Islamic thinkers who are fairly conservative, I think, have like great takes on things that are also like quite socially inclusive and tolerant, because Sunni Islam is like a fairly inclusive and tolerant sect. It's just Shia Islam that tends not to be so much. So I'm enjoying reading books on Islam by like Prince Ghazi of Jordan, and he would be like a conservative thinker. I think is worth taking seriously.
Sounds like my hypothesis was inaccurate then. I was hypothesizing that the reason that you like them is because they agreed with your political leanings, but it's sounding like there's people in there that probably don't agree politically, and you still appreciate the way they look at philosophy of religion better than Jordan Peterson.
So remember, I like politically, I consider myself like center right, to be honest. And I mean, this obviously having like a political spectrum's hard, and it means
Sure.
like,
and I think it is different in
cultures.
the UK too.
Yeah,
like than
different cultures have different. Yeah, where so like I would consider like Joe Biden to be center, right?
You would.
Not center right. I just said right. Like I would consider Joe Biden to be center. Yeah.
Really? I don't.
Yeah.
It's funny because I think most politicians, I definitely of the like smaller government view of like wishing the government was smaller, at least more local. Just have. I think the more local it is, the more voice that people actually have over it. It seems weird that people in Washington D.C. decide things.
So I'm actually I'm quite a fan of decentralization but I think like federal governance is also like necessary as well in order to kind of make stuff work. Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
same. Like I'm not like an anarchist or anything. It's just,
Mm.
um,
But I'm a big fan of small communities having as much power as possible to govern
mhm,
over themselves, and I
makes
like
more sense to me.
economically. I like a model that's been put forward by someone called Kate Raworth called donut economics, which is about how communities can use their resources better to live sustainably as well.
Yeah. Socially, I'm pretty libertarian. Like I don't really care what other people do. Um, I mean, I kind of think generally like educational institutions are blinded by their progressive bias. Like I think Jonathan Haidt's done some research on this about the imbalance of conservative and progressives in higher education, and he's actually pointing to like this is like a real problem. Like just as an example, like I like the scientific method, and it doesn't work unless you have people that actually disagree with you. Like it just doesn't work well. And so um anyway, I feel like that bias is spilled out into like professional institutions, and I think a lot of people that are on the more progressive side, if they heard what I just said, would view that as like a conspiracy. Like it's not a conspiracy, it's just an observation of like I think that's a good hypothesis of kind of what's going on. And so, and when I say it's like spilled over into professional institutions, I'm saying most of the media people have gone through the educational system, and um, most political people have also gone through the uh, higher level education as well. And so, anyway, when I say that, what does that make you think?
So again, it's not like something I've looked deeply into. I am aware that like there are people who have provided criticisms of Jonathan Haidt's claims specifically, but I also know that more educated people, education does tend to correlate with like leaning left politically, right? Um, and I mean, there's different ways of explaining that. One way of explaining it would be to say that the institution's biased, and so it trains people to think that way. I basically explain it by thinking that education tends to make people more compassionate and more sensitive to various concerns that might mean that they care more about the state being able to provide welfare or having strong institutions that can combat things like fascism, for example, um, and uh, I think that that's what education does for a lot of people is it makes them just more sensitive to some more sort of like global concerns that might be that's how I explain why you see those differences in like education level and where people tend to lean politically, but obviously like another way of explaining that would be because the institutions themselves are just teaching people in a biased way, though it I think that in a lot of courses, there are sort of like attempts made to avoid bias in the way that people are like educated on these sorts of topics. I mean, I can speak from philosophy departments and courses that I've been involved in myself, where the people lecturing and people I talk to who lecture make every attempt they can to mitigate to present different perspectives fairly and allow students to come to their own conclusions. I know people make similar attempts in teaching things like economics and stuff like that. But yeah, like maybe there is a bias in the way that it's being taught that I'm unaware of as well, and that would change my mind.
Well, I guess my biggest indicator of this is that like you were saying that Joe Biden is center, and
Mm,
I view him not as center. So it's like if people feel like they're center, but
mm,
they're not, like that's kind
mm.
of a problem too. Like so maybe
What?
those people
Yeah.
that were trying to present it in a way that was unbiased or trying to represent people's views in a way that they would agree with, they were still leaning one way, right? Like and so then you start to
Mm,
get this weird view of what people think, and then you run into
yeah.
someone that's actually middle America conservative and you're like, what? Like I've never come across anybody that thinks like you before, right? Like
Mm,
they don't interact with someone that actually thinks it. I don't know if this is making sense.
No, I think so. The reason that I would describe someone like Biden as center is because on what I think that the type of spectrum of political views that I would advocate for accommodates people like Joe Biden, but also people like Bernie Sanders, people like Putin, people like Hitler and Stalin and stuff, and like your typical middle American. I think that the way that Americans tend to view the political spectrum is kind of like a subset of the type of spectrum that someone like me is referring to, wherein there's like a whole host of basically socialist views that just don't exist as a part of that spectrum because they're not even considered to be live options because of the way. So I think that is to say that I think American political discourse is like skewed to the right. Um,
Hmm. Can you give me an example of something that that Joe Biden could advocate for that would make him more left, I guess? Like what would make him left? That might help me
uh,
understand.
yeah, so maybe like universal basic income. Um, Types of regulation on markets. So moving towards like a more planned economy in various areas rather than like the markets governing the way that they function. In
Aren't
terms of
some
like
markets are planned though, right? Like
some
where they
are, yeah,
set
that's
the
right. Like
prices.
I
So
agree, and even under a conservative, but what I mean is,
you'd have to be
um,
100% wanting or
not
advocating.
100%, not 100%, but I'm talking about
What would make
things
him
that
left
aren't
though?
currently planned. Well, moving like things that aren't currently. It's
Like what? Can you give
again,
me an
this is
example?
complicated.
Yeah.
So maybe like the auto manufacturing industry, but this is where it becomes complicated, right? Because the government does subsidize certain things in certain ways, in order to incentivize like businesses to operate in certain ways or to get up and running and stuff.
Hmm.
But maybe the government could essentially like get involved entirely in terms of like saying, well, look, here's how many citizens need cars, here's our capacity for industry, this number of people have jobs, here's how they're going to get paid and stuff like that, rather than allowing
So
the
full
market to
blown
sort of regulate
communism,
stuff.
advocating for communism would make him left leaning.
That would definitely move him to the left from where
Okay.
he is, yeah.
Is
But
there
I
something
think there's
maybe
like,
less
yeah,
radical that
yeah, definitely. That's
that
just the
makes
first
someone
thing that
left?
came to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So I would say
Like I consider communism pretty radical, so maybe other people don't, but I do.
so I think if he wanted like a nationalized health service, for example, I
But he
basically
does
look at the
advocate for
list of.
that, right?
Well, he's fighting for the payments around the Medicaid thing.
Well,
Um,
given that he was
which isn't
ruler
the
ruler
same.
supreme, I think he would want that. So
He
there
might
is a
want it, but it's not a policy that he's actively pushing for um, in his party. It's not on the table. What they are currently pushing for is to maintain the Medicaid payments or whatever, right?
so
But
how
they're
is
not
that
pushing
center
for.
though? Like that he's trying to get closer to what you just described
Well,
though.
so
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 wouldn't that
in
make
well
someone
that
left?
no, most conservatives in Europe think that the state should provide free point of service healthcare.
Oh, so that doesn't make
Um,
someone left.
It's a very yeah, it's a very no, it's more left. It it moves someone relatively left, but it doesn't put someone in the left wanting that. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
So if he wanted that, it would move. If he was actively pushing for that in his party right now, that would move him more left than he currently is. But just wanting that does it. But someone could want that and still be right. It's because of the kind of like skewed part of the spectrum that the US is looking at things from, I think.
I guess I'm still not quite understanding how he's centered because I feel like a lot of those things that you described, he is trying to get closer to those things, which is why I would call him left, is because that's where he's trying to move the country is toward those types of things versus a conservative would like by your definition, I feel like everybody would be center. Like even Trump is center because he didn't successfully actually do the things that he said he wanted to do while he was campaigning.
Well, Bernie, sorry, not Bernie. Biden has not said that he wants free point of service healthcare in the US. He said that he wants to fight to maintain the Medicare bills that were established under Obama, right, and that various Republicans have been fighting to remove currently, and that's been one of so that's
Mhm.
different from that's different from him saying, no, I'm building the American National Health Service or whatever, and
Mm.
everyone will have free point of service, done out of taxes, healthcare.
So you would consider
With no
Obama more
insurance.
left leaning then?
Um,
Because that's like definitely one of his big things was Obamacare, which was
yeah, I'm just trying to think overall about like like
oh,
I like probably would. Um, maybe I would. I can't really remember a lot of stuff about Obama, to be 100% honest. But like, yeah, he probably was from what I do remember.
What would make Biden more conservative?
Um, so deregulation of markets, not providing government help to like during COVID, for example, to like businesses and stuff, like letting businesses fail more on their own, perhaps. Allowing more like trade, allowing more like pollution of the environment, not participating in like international agreements around reducing carbon emissions or incentivizing companies to use cleaner or invest in cleaner technologies through government subsidies and things, and just letting the companies do what they want of their own accord. It's sort of it can become difficult around foreign policy because that stuff's very, like you have right wing takes that are very isolationist and right wing takes that are very pro trade with other countries, and similarly with like left wing takes. So that becomes more difficult. I think in terms of the social things that I would consider conservative, it would be more a kind of like preservation, more of a kind of like reverence for tradition and the way things have been done historically, an attempt to kind of like preserve some of those values and that way of life a bit more, which might involve, like more of a concern about like guns and things, right, in America, like being more pro people having guns and having like those kind of like individual rights to form like militias with weapons and things like that, like those sorts of concerns that people have in the US
Hmm.
would make him more right wing, in my view. Whereas obviously he's someone who thinks that people shouldn't have as easy access to guns as they do.
Hmm. Okay, we've been going for 2 hours. I apologize. There
That's right.
is one more thing I am curious about if you're interested.
Yeah, we can do one more thing. Don't worry.
Okay. So, the SE community kind of built up around Peter Boghossian's book of, what is it? How to Make an Atheist, right?
A manual for creating atheists.
That's right. What it seems like there are plenty of more. See, there are people that are skeptical of all the political correctness stuff, and I guess what are you thinking of that? Like, I noticed that you read someone that poked holes into Jonathan Haidt. Like, I think anybody can have holes poked through the things they've said, but it seems like you know about all of the people that have poked holes in people that are concerned about the illiberal part of like political correctness. Like, but you don't seem to think that's a problem, I guess. That the left is gone extreme, or that it's illiberal in some way, or that you don't see that problem, right?
Yeah, I'm much more concerned about fascism in America than I am about like communism or like Antifa or something like that, right? Like uh, the the people who have proto-fascist or pro-fascist views are the ones who actually stormed the Capitol building, and the US has had a very hard time understanding how to respond to that or even prosecute any of these people in the kind of aftermath. And similarly with like major news corporations, um, I mean, okay, the legal case isn't decided yet, but promoting just complete, patently false lies around voter fraud, for example, and that's the legal case that Dominion, the company who makes the voting systems, is currently bringing against Fox News. But it is at least looking like Fox News is gonna lose, where people are being prosecuted for promoting positions that they were in a position to
Defamatory
know were
stuff.
false. Anyway,
Yeah.
what's that? Yeah, yeah.
I'm trying to think of how. So
Just
when you
more
when you
directly in
see
response to
someone,
what you said. Oh, sorry,
well,
you
just
go
when
ahead.
you see that, no, that's fine. I think that answers kind of that's getting there. When you see someone like Peter Boghossian, who I'm sure you respect on a lot of the things he thinks and the way he presents himself, like what is it in him? What what do you think he's seeing and Jonathan Haidt seeing and Barry Weiss and just a lot of these people that, like, honestly 10 years ago I would probably view them as a political opponent, and they're concerned about something. Like, what is it that they're concerned about, I guess?
I mean, I don't know so much in the case of like Height. In the case of Boghossian, I'm not exactly sure what's happened. I mean, I think there were always problems. I never was a big fan of a manual for creating atheists, despite liking some of the stuff that the street epistemology community does. And I think that this comes across in the book, right? Like there are a couple of stories in the book that I just think are like horrible things and insights into his
I haven't
psychology.
even
So,
read it, so like you might
well,
have
what
to.
one of which is a woman asked him for change or something at a gas station, and he thought that she was like a heroin addict, and so he said you have to relate to people where they're at. And he said he has a scar on his stomach from having an appendix out or something. Can't remember why he has a scar on his stomach. And he said he lifted up his shirt and pointed to it and said, like, the wife did this to me last time I was late home. And he was like, that's an example of being relatable and meeting people where they're at. And that just appeared to me as like super fucked up. Like, what is even going on in your mind, and how have you weirdly dehumanized this other person to the point where you think that that's relatable? The other thing I found weird was his story about, I think, his mum or his grandmother on her deathbed, who had like a crucifix and like wanted him to like say a prayer for them as they were dying on their deathbed, right? And he was like basically boasting about how he wouldn't because he's so principled or whatever. And again, that just kind of like appealed to me as kind of fucked up. There's a lot of stuff in that book where I just think he's like being an asshole, and it's because he thinks that he's so rational and so much better than other people. And actually, like, I don't know that he's got any points that are that good on any of the stuff that he's into, like philosophy of religion or politics, whatever. The other thing I'd say is that a lot of the people who have become sort of IDW alt right types, they've kind of come from the new atheism movement in the 2000s, kind of in the aftermath of 9/11 and all that stuff that happened. And a lot of them, I think you can see a kind of repeating pattern of a lot of them wanting to be seen as public intellectuals and kind of like ride the wave of these popular movements to make themselves the center of attention. I think there's a bit of that going on in Boghossian's case, for sure. I also think he genuinely believes the things that he's seeing. I don't know why. I don't know how he's become so.
What is it that he's seeing? Like, if he were here and you were going to
Yeah.
say, I think this is what you're seeing, in a way that he would accept, how would you phrase what he's seeing?
So he would say that there is. I have to avoid using a word like cabal, right? Where I'm making the case that he's obviously making a kind of conspiratorial claim, but that the vast majority of people who are in educational institutions, for example, have been overtaken by a worldview of critical race theory, and that is shaping the way that they create their curriculums and teach the next generation of people, such that their view of reality will be distorted and they will change all the values that make America great, or something like that.
Hmm. How would he say that it's being distorted? Like, what is distorted about the way that they're teaching about race?
Yeah, so he'd say it's not putting enough like emphasis on the individual. it's not putting enough emphasis on the exchange of reasons, and that it's basically just Marxism. He'd probably say that it's a type of pseudoscience with bad publishing standards because of the whole like grievance affairs things, where lots of the kind of theory that gets published isn't very rigorous or isn't open to falsification as well. Yeah, I mean, he'd have a bit more to say, but I just can't remember right now. Guy who does a better job of addressing these things is Aaron Rabinovitz, who I interviewed on CRT Panic, where because he spent a lot of his time explicitly like studying the kind of claims of Boghossian and addressing some of these concerns.
Mm-hmm. So you're not even a little bit concerned about that at all?
No, I honestly only see it. The only people I see talking about it are people like Boghossian who are like tilting at windmills, in my view, and getting. I mean, I think they get feedback like from their audience, and it's very engaging for them and stuff. But I don't even think that Peter Boghossian understands like critical theory, right? Like, I don't think he understands the claims that he's disagreeing with.
And you would say the same thing about James Lindsay, right? That he doesn't understand critical theory either.
Yeah, especially like the lectures that he's given to sovereign nations and what's it called? New Discourses, that YouTube channel around critical theory and stuff. Like, that is such a strange concoction of history of philosophy and political views and stuff, with just all sorts being mixed in. Hegelian Marxism, like conspiracies about like groups of people like the World Economic Forum and their views and stuff, and it's very 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 close to the sort of like the Jews behind it all, and like
You
in
think he
Weimar
thinks
Germany
that
kind of
as
thing.
well?
I don't know if he'd put it in exactly those terms, so I don't know that he thinks exactly that. I do think that he thinks that is a kind of cabal of nefarious people in like the World Economic Forum who are plotting like to replace the white race and to kill off like millions of people on the earth. Though I think he'd definitely commit himself to those claims. I think he'd say that lots of them happen to be Jewish, but I don't know that it would be like explicitly anti-Semitic in the same way that like Nazi worldview was. So where it's like being a Jew came with like a bad essence, there's like bad blood. I don't think it would be like that. It would just be a kind of coincidence that lots of them are Jews in his view.
So, have you ever heard James Lindsay say something you agree with, or have you ever, where would you say you agree with him?
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff he says about maths. In terms of politically, I don't know that I really listen to. I only ever really engage with him when he's talking about this stuff, and I know I disagree with him about this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there are some more like mundane things we would agree on. I'm just trying to think about what I know of his views, right? Like, for example, maybe we would have like similar views around like international like migration of people or something. I don't know, because I've just never really heard him talk about it, but it's not inconceivable for me that he would like think sort of similar things to me, like, oh, it can stimulate the economy in these ways, but at certain times you want to encourage more like skilled laborers rather than unskilled. It's like, I mean, it's not inconceivable that that would be his take on that.
I
Right.
see.
Yeah.
But as far as his criticism of just the
of like CRT and stuff.
how do you think he could learn to understand CRT better?
I think by reading more of these philosophers on their own terms. So a lot of the way that James Lindsay and Peterson come to understand these terms is through people who are expositing that kind of worldview but like really badly. So people who are like part of like the Ayn Rand Institute, like Stephen Hicks and his book Postmodernism Explained, um, is just like a complete bastardization of like what any postmodernism would commit themselves to. He even calls Hume and Kant post like the original postmodern thinkers,
I can't
right?
remember what
And
you said about the debate between Stephen Hicks and what's that guy's name? That he identifies as a postmodernist. Do you ever see that debate?
no, I'm not sure.
What is his name? Thaddeus Russell, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know about that. I did hear. I think I've remember you mentioning Thaddeus Russell once, and I remember someone saying something in a comment about Thaddeus Russell, but I don't know what it was.
I guess I was hoping you'd seen it because I was curious
Yeah.
if you viewed Thaddeus Russell as like a true postmodernist. So
No idea. Yeah,
that's the
sorry.
reason. Um, so do you think that?
But the Hicks exposition, just to go into it a bit more, like it's just a complete fuck up. Like he characterizes the history of philosophy into like three key stages: pre-modern, which he characterizes by anti-intellectualism, in which he includes thinkers like Plato, Aristotle, and Thomas Aquinas, like medieval superstitious thinking. Um, it it just not correct. Like Thomas Aquinas is one of the most thorough thinkers to have ever lived. Wrote like over something like 7 million words,
Mhm.
um, and every point that he makes, the method of disputation is incredibly rigorous, where there's an assertion made and then there's counter arguments made and various rebuttals made to those counter arguments from reason, from theology, from empirical evidence, from the senses. It's just that they didn't have as much information as we have now through the various like experiments and things that we've been able to do to manipulate nature, that they came to very different
I
conclusions.
wouldn't.
But
I
it's
don't think. Do you think he thinks that they are because he classifies them as pre-modern? That means that he doesn't think they have anything of value to say.
not that they don't have anything of value to say, but what he does claim is that they're superstitious and anti-intellectual, right? Um,
What's anti-intellectual? What was his definition of that?
so well, I'm not sure what his definition is exactly, but I mean, it's pretty clear that it means people that aren't fond of thinking. And given his characterization of the Enlightenment thinkers who he wants to contrast against those thinkers as being people who deployed reason to figure out the truth, right?
Hmm.
Um, it seems like they're against that. They don't want to use reason to figure out the truth.
Hmm. Well, given that I disagree with some of the way you framed some of the people I already think about, I could see that the way you're framing that would be. I have to take your word on it though because I haven't read
Mm.
anything there. Um,
Well, I mean, I've got a 1.5 hour video on the first chapter of his book, but other people have done reviews of his book, bringing up similar things. It's widely understood in academic philosophy circles to be like one of like just an insane misrepresentation of the history of philosophy as a book. But
Hmm.
yeah.
Interesting. I guess I kind of was having this thought while you were talking about James Lindsay and just how you're saying that the way he's framing it is just bizarre and conspiratorial and stuff.
Hmm.
And I guess what would it take for you to be convinced of that conspiracy? Do you think?
I would have to believe in Hegelianism.
Hegel?
Yeah, that's a view that, uh, again, what is Hegel's view? Don't know that Lindsay exactly knows, but that Geist is working itself out through the grand arc of time. That seems to be a key component of Lindsay's view. I'd have to believe in some
That
kind
he
of
he believes that?
this is part of the way that he has come to understand like
Oh,
postmodernism
oh, oh.
in
You're saying
America.
he's trying to show that the postmodern, or at least the postmodern doesn't make sense when you say, because the way I understand postmodern is that like there is no reality, there is no truth. Like we're post like
Well,
thinking.
that's not really what I mean. I'm a postmodernist, and that's not what I would say it is.
Oh, what is it
But
then?
like a series of methods that are just critical of series of methods that are critical about the types of language that we use in our discourses, both because of the historical origins of those languages and the way that they currently fit into our linguistic systems. So,
It sounds like you would
like,
not agree with Thaddeus Russell then, because that's how the way I just described it is kind of how Thaddeus Russell describes postmodernism.
yeah,
Like there is no grand narrative. Like
yeah, that would
we're
be
all like
that would be a part.
it's all a social construct of like what happened before us has led to here kind of a thing, but there is no like reason why we're going anywhere. There's no like
Well, those would be sort of claims that you could agree with, I think, and be so like there is no grand narrative, possibly something I'd agree with, and a lot of postmodernists would agree with.
mhm.
Language is socially constructed, something I agree with, and possibly most postmodernists would agree with. There's nowhere we're going. That's kind of a bit harder. Like I think I'm going somewhere, so I
Well,
don't know.
not in
Like,
a there's not like not in a Neoplatonist type of way, right? Like
yeah, yeah, sure.
that having that kind of grand narrative doesn't
Yeah,
make
but I
sense.
think that type
Postmodernist.
of way is unintelligible, so that would be my view.
Mm. Uh, yeah. So yeah, I guess when I'm listening, so blah, blah, as far as philosophy goes, I feel like I'm terrible at details, and when people explain things, I feel like I'm okay at like understanding big picture stuff, and so I can follow people better than I can like re-explain it, for example.
Okay.
And so I feel like I can follow James Lindsay what he's saying, and it makes sense. And
Yeah.
I guess I see I have the same worries, but then I also my husband he helps me like bring me back. He's like, just live your life though. Like listen to Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson just says like, do what you can in your life. Like, why are you worried about that huge big picture thing? And I'm like, yeah, that's true. And so then I try to just stay grounded in my own reality, I guess.
Mm.
But like it's not absurd to me to think that I can see the parallel. A lot of people make the parallel with like the Chinese Cultural Revolution with kind of the same thing that James Lindsay's pointing at. Like you say you see fascism and that like being a very like a very real possibility. I don't
Yeah.
not see that, but
Mm.
I also see this other one, and so I don't know what to make of
Mm.
that either. Like it's not that
So who, which side of the spectrum do you think went into the Capitol building and tried to capture and kill governing officials doing an important process in the US political system for the handover of power?
who do I think did that?
Yeah.
I think a mob did that. Yeah, like
Do you
the
think that that mob had any particular political leanings?
well, yeah, they were conservatives, and that's why I.
For me, that
By the
there's a
way, I
lot
just
of the. Yeah.
admitted that I agree that that's a problem. Like
I know, but what I'm saying is when you say I see them both equally as
not
problems, or would you
equally.
say okay,
I see them both as potential problems.
okay? I think I see them both as potential problems as well, but I see one as disproportionately more of a problem than the other. So they're
Mm,
still both potential problems,
no,
but
not
just
that.
not equally.
I don't think
Okay.
so. Um, see, I guess my thing is I feel like the the institutional power is way more on one side. But I also recognize that you poke a bear long enough, and it's a bunch of people that also probably have the ability to create their like I mean to create their own revolution, right? Like that there's 50% of the country that's feeling this way. I think that there's a possibility of that too. And I think humans tend to be really tribalistic. And so I don't put it past anyone to do a lot of violent things. That scares me. Like, but I wouldn't say that that violence is non-existent on one side or the other. You know what I mean? Like,
Well, do you think I would say it's non-existent on one side or the other?
Well, you're obviously you're more concerned about the conservative side of things
But as for the
because you just
claim
said
that as for the claim that it was alleged that I might believe that it's non-existent on one side or the other, do you think I would affirm that?
no. Obviously, there's violence on the other side too. I don't think you deny that, but you don't think it's a
Yeah,
problem.
that's right. No, I mean I think it's a problem too, right?
Sorry,
When
you don't think it's
yeah,
this a scalable problem, as scalable as the fascist problem.
I I think it's disproportionately a right-wing problem, right? It's not to say it's not a problem on the left. It's not to say that when it happens on the left, it's not terrible. It's not to say that there isn't a concern I would have about like radical, if radical leftists were able to gain power.
Hmm.
Though the actual credible threat that I see, the most probable threat comes from the right in the US. I think if Trump's reelected, it will be
Threat of what?
absolutely
I guess. Let's make sure we're talking
threat of
about things.
fascism, of actual fascism in
Authoritarianism.
the United States. Not just authoritarianism. I'm talking about like actual fascist values in the society, changing the laws, changing the way that that society operates. Um, in order to be like a fascist state that has enemies, treats people horribly, people who aren't on the in group, has a whole mythology around like blood and soil, basically, and the getting back to the way of the ancients and all that
The
sort of
so
stuff.
the do you think the people that trespassed on the Capitol building, do you think that um, they were like 100% fascist or like 10% fascist or like what?
I don't know that this. I don't know. Like I don't even know, like what you're exactly asking me. Like
But okay,
any because
the values just said that you're worried about in order for the country to like enact laws like that, you'd have to have someone voting for those laws. You'd have to
Yeah, but
have
what I'm saying is I don't know what it means for a crowd to be 90% fascist. Like I don't understand. So
that they would want
the
that.
thing that
They
you're
want
telling
that.
me.
That they want that for
Yeah,
their
but
government.
I don't know what what you mean when you say that they would want that, right? Like do you mean like if you said, "Do you want the country to be fascist?" they would say yes. Or do you mean if you said, "I think we need to like get back to this set of values or something," they would say yes, right?
Yeah.
Um
What set of values then do you
I think
think
it's
they would be proponents for that you would call fascist? That they would say,
um
yes, I want this, and you would say that's fascist.
So, I think it would be like getting back to the good old days, some element of like subjugation of women and patriarchy and stuff like that. Patriarchal head of the family, the nuclear family.
So you think they would
Um,
like enact laws that would say women can't work in the workplace, and they
not
would
that
be
women,
voting for
no,
that.
not that women, no, I don't think it would be laws that women can't work, but I think it would be probably strongly socially discouraged because the function of, if you look at like the kind of rhetoric that comes out of people like Matt Walsh, the function of a woman is to be like pregnant and barefoot. Um,
So your definition of fascism is when something is socially pressured to do something? I thought fascism
no.
was that it was the state that was enforcing these types of things.
Well, fascism is a confusing polysemous term, right? So I'm
You're the one
gonna
that
be
used it.
reticent. So I'm gonna be reticent to provide you with an essentializing characterization of fascism. But what I am happy to do is sort of help you if you don't understand the way that I'm using the term, right? But I don't think that there is going to be any like correct essentializing characterization of it because I don't think that these terms are like have like necessary and sufficient conditions. I think they're clusters of phenomena and properties that have a family resemblance, and people study those things politically. They study them sociologically and they study them psychologically. And so a lot of these things become like markers for a society or a political system becoming fascist, but they're not necessary and jointly sufficient because you can have lots of them without some of them, and something still be fascist, right? There's examples of fascist societies like Sparta and under Lycurgan law, and Germany under Adolf Hitler. And you can find things that are definitely fascist about those societies, but that the societies didn't have in common. So, for example, leaving babies out to perish from nature if they had deformities, right? That was something that was done in Sparta. It was definitely part of their fascism under Lycurgan law. Wasn't done in Nazi Germany. So that's something that's fascist, and if a society is doing that sort of thing, you might think, well, that's a kind of marker or a red flag for fascism or something, but it's not a necessary condition.
What's the fear of fascism? Like, I'm not saying that fascism is good. I'm trying to understand when you say, I fear that they're going to
Yeah.
become fascist, like what would that look like what would that look like? Again, go back to like
Yeah.
a law or maybe not a law.
Well, okay, here's a law like criminalizing gay marriage in the US.
Uh-huh. And you think that the people that stormed the Capitol, I guess I don't, how do I word this? I don't feel like I'm trying to when I remember following on Twitter January 6th, right? And I went and that was an eye opener for me because I was like, conservatives don't do this. Like they're supposed to be like they've been all against Antifa and all of the riots that they've been involved in. Like, why are they doing this? And so I was really disappointed. I was disappointed that anybody would be willing to participate in that. And it made me realize that this mob thinking can happen anywhere. Like there isn't like some line between conservatives and progressives that say you're good people and you're bad people. Like there are people that are doing things that are illiberal on both sides, right? And it made me realize the danger of that, right? My fear of like the left side of things is that we just it's like more like a slow burn type of a thing. It's not like I don't know. I don't know what I'm worried about actually, because like when I think of my daily life, I can't see anything happening quickly. but um, but it bothers me that things keep moving towards something that seems illiberal to me. Like I like the idea of like John Stuart Mill type liberalism, right? Is that making sense a little bit? Like I think we're
I mean, I've heard lots of people in the IDW say this, right? I don't always know that they know what they mean by it.
so you don't
Like if I
understand
like
what I'm trying
since
to say then.
no,
It
I
just sounded like
understand.
a sound bite.
Yeah, that's what it. So I've heard since 2008, right? Like I've listened to Sargon of Akkad say, "I'm a classical liberal." What I mean by that is a John Stuart Mill liberal, and I've heard this a million times since then,
Mhm,
from through to Konstantin Kissin now, who's on the Upshot, from
mhm.
Jordan Peterson, from Sam Harris and others. But um, I mean, I'm not sure that there's a whole lot of content there beyond like I'm all for like individuals having lots of rights, maybe.
Mhm.
And again, I don't know that that's in conflict with what like just that isn't in conflict with what a lot of proponents of like CRT would want as well. Um, so
Well, it's
I don't know
interesting
what extra there
because,
is
like,
really.
that's what James Lindsay does is he goes and the proponents of a lot of that stuff, he will quote them and he's convinced that they're definitely like aiming towards some kind of communist utopia. Even though you would never
Yeah,
actually get there, you would just constantly be deconstructing the whole time. You would never actually reach utopia, but
I mean, like so even like that thing you just said, that sounds like a thing that you've learned from like him or someone, right? Like
of
even though
course it
you'd never
is.
get
I
there, you'd constantly be deconstructing, and I just have no idea what
Oh,
you
that
even
actually
like mean by that.
I sense that in my life,
Yeah.
actually. This idea, it's something I actually, it gives me pause because it's like, I feel like it's really easy to criticize stuff, but it's a lot harder to actually build something up. That's something that I've seen myself, and I guess I've heard echoes of that from other people too. But
But what do you think you
that's something
actually
I've
mean by
noticed.
that, right?
What I mean by
Like,
that is it's really easy to like tear stuff down. It's a lot. Whenever I try to come up with like some kind of positive claim, my immediately I have like a cynical or critical point of view that can like tear it right down. Like, so all I'm saying is
mhm.
like you almost have to like take a leap of faith in some way to make some kind of positive claim to like direct your life, even. Like I'm talking about this
But
in a
how
very
does
personal way.
yeah, but I just don't understand what this has to do with postmodernism, like, or with socialism, or like I just don't get it. Like, okay, I think that the NHS should be better funded. Like, what's that got to do with me, like, having the like tearing things down? I don't want to. What
Mm,
do I want to tear down? Like the Tory cabinet's like stupid economic plan that doesn't fund the NHS very well. I want to build up good hospitals with like good electronic record keeping systems that aren't running on Windows XP and vulnerable to security exploits. Like I don't understand. Like
mm.
I just don't understand how this. Like
How
this
it
is like
you
almost
don't
like
see
a
it as you don't see it as like corrosive or anything.
it's like one of these Jordan Peterson theological type things, right? Where you're
Mhm,
talking about like at this personal level, the line between good and evil runs down the heart of every man type. But then it's somehow in your mind it's connected to this like justification for rejecting postmodernism and like more socialist type political theories. And I just don't understand the connection. Like for me it's not connected at all.
mhm.
Even if it's true. Yeah.
Yeah. That's tough. I don't know how to get you any closer. Like I've thought about this for a long time and I was like, I think this is how I can explain it to him by asking these questions. And yeah, I
Do you not
am
think it could be like
not
a
any
prejudice
closer.
though? Do you not think it could be like a prejudice though, where maybe you're like, well, people, um, people should try and build stuff and not just be like negative Nancy's or something. Like maybe that's
Oh,
like the
for sure.
thought, right?
It's
Like I
tied.
don't, I don't want to be like that.
That's definitely my personality. So very possible. Like
But then do you not think you might
I
just be
think
kind of
I could.
projecting that onto political groups you don't like and going, well, they're all
Oh,
just like negative Nancy's or something, rather than maybe like finding out if they are, or like so someone like Bernie Sanders, right? I think he has a really positive vision of
mhm,
building up America and building a lot of stuff. I don't even think he's like that. He's not like full of vitriol at all. He's worked incredibly hard throughout his political career.
mhm,
I highly recommend people listen to the interview with him on The Rest is Politics with Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart. And yeah, it just doesn't sound like a negative Nancy type at all. Like very, very positive, optimistic, hardworking, and I just don't understand like how if this connection's supposed to be there, how is it he can be like that and yet have these sort of like socialist economic views, right?
I guess there's just seems to be like this. Uh, I think it's called critical consciousness, where um, you just see how things are racist in your life, and you see how um, you know. Does that is that ringing a bell? Did you listen to the decoding the gurus, Robin
The
DiAngelo
one
at all?
on I kind of found that one boring, so I stopped. Yeah.
They get into in the middle part of it where I felt like they actually like honestly, as I'm watching it, I would, from my perspective, I was like, I feel like, um, I feel like they were being easy on her, but that
Mhm.
makes sense because they probably are, they don't agree with me with my worldview, so that makes sense. But they managed to hit on a few things that I liked a lot, and I guess I just view that kind of, there's no pushback against like the Robin DiAngelos, really. And there
Was
is
that not what they were doing though? Like,
yeah. Well, yeah,
yeah.
but you don't hear um you doing that, right? You don't hear you'll get on there and they're talking about a problem that is there, and it just seems to be hidden because it's like it's almost mainstream now. Like I I, I hang out with this group called Three Practices, and they have most of them are left leaning, and I think a lot of them are actually Christian. So a lot of them are like totally different than me, but um, they they would I think mostly agree with Robin DiAngelo, and so
Mm.
and then they'd take in a lot of that kind of religiosity of it too, and that's kind of what they were decoding. They were just kind of saying, hey, even if you agree with the end point here, she's using some tactics here that you would see also in
Mm.
religious paradigm, right? Um, anyway, I'm trying to think of why I went there. I don't know. Like maybe you would disagree with that because I'm guessing that decoding the gurus you don't agree with 100%. So maybe you would disagree with their criticism of
Not
her.
100%. I think, well, it like I said, I didn't really listen to that episode because I just found it boring. Like like I said, I think I just don't view. I don't think that it's like a genuine problem, right? Like people, I don't like a lot of people who have very extreme left-wing views. I think there's a lot of, so I'm like very pro um like trans rights, trans healthcare, very pro like um reform of the police in the US to I think there's like systematic racism against black people and stuff, but I also think there's a bunch of like grifty weirdos with horrible views who like talk about these topics like trans issues or like black people's problems in America and stuff, and just have really crap hot takes. But I just don't think they're that much of a problem.
Mhm.
That I sort of care to spend a lot of my time in. What I do see being a problem in the kind of communities that I am immediately a part of is people going down like right wing conspiracy theories, becoming anti vax, becoming climate change deniers, believing in like great replacement theory, believing the World Economic Forum's out to get people and stuff like that. So that's the stuff I sort of tend to focus on, I think, just
Mhm.
because it's the thing that is having an impact in my life. Maybe if there were more people around me who were pushing like the left wing grifty nonsense, I would care about it more and have like more of an incentive to do something about it. But it just isn't like ever a problem in my life. I encounter lots of people like I train Brazilian jiu-jitsu, right? I encounter a ton of people who for whom like Jordan Peterson or Andrew Tate or someone has like pushed them into a whole bunch of like weird beliefs and like they don't believe that the vaccine works and think COVID's a hoax and stuff. What
Mhm.
I don't find ever is anyone who's like listened to so much critical race theory that they're like I don't know, call me whitey or something because they think I need to pay reparations for all the damage. Like it's just not a real problem I ever encounter. Whereas I do actually encounter like the opposite one. So that's the one I kind of deal with in my life.
Hmm. That makes sense. That's fair. I think that's probably the thing that gives me the most comfort is like even though I'm worried about those things, like when I stop and like look around my life and stuff, it's like it's running
Yeah.
quite fine. Yeah, for sure.
I mean, like,
Absolutely.
so I get the concern because some of the things that some of those people say are like pretty fucked up, nasty things, right? About like
Hmm.
how they would want to treat white people or whatever, and it does seem that a lot of people weirdly give it a free pass. But I just think it's like, you know, when those
Depending on
people
which echo
storm the
chamber you're
Capitol
in.
building, yeah, so when those people storm the Capitol building, like then, but like look at how the difference there is between giving like a talk to some students at a university campus, right, and like that which a political sect seems to actively have done in the US, and still, like Trump's running for presidency again, right? Like,
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I think it's been a good conversation. thanks for your time. Thanks for going for so long too.
Yeah, it's all right. No problem, Marty. Thanks for preparing questions and things.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Have a good night.
You too. See you around. Bye.
See ya.